This will sound very strange, but the train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, what some people in the railroad industry were for years warning of and call a bomb train, and the subsequent evacuation of East Palestine due to toxic gas, and the 2022 movie White Noise about a train derailment and evacuation due to toxic gas that takes place in the early 1980s near East Palestine, Ohio, a movie in which many residents from East Palestine were in as extras, and another bomb train in Mississauga, Ontario in 1979 that resulted in a fireball explosion 5,000 feet high and the largest mass evacuation in North American history due to the threat of toxic chlorine gas, as well as the largest mass migration of people in North America in the 20th century, which was the exodus of Anglophones from Montreal Island to Toronto and Mississauga in the late 1970s due to oppressive minority laws that paralleled the Hebrews' mass exodus from Egypt in the Bible due to oppressive minority laws, were massive prophetic signs from God that are predicting that there will be a dirty bomb explosion and subsequent mass evacuation from Manhattan Island due to toxic nuclear material and gas on April 13th, 2023. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction was made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email and forensic notes PDF. If you are skeptical, please email me and I will forward these to you. As you can see in this email, this prediction was known since at least February 22nd. All right, now this will probably be it's definitely one of the most important videos on this channel, but this will probably be my personal highlight here because, as you will see, I was made for making this video. The reason why I'm alive is to make this video, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. And so, but there's a lot of information, and it's contained in this email thread that I wrote out to friends as I was discovering and learning things. It will be condensed. It will be full of important information every minute. So, but that's the nature of how I write the emails. But I will explain how the East Palestine train derailment is a massive prophetic sign from God, and it is for the purpose, the main purpose. Well, there's a few purposes, but they're all for God's purpose. And the main purpose, as we will see, is to demonstrate or to confirm the prediction of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan and the subsequent mass evacuation of Manhattan Island due to the radioactive material. That's what is hinted at with the derailment of the train and explosion and the toxic waste and the evacuation of East Palestine. And I will prove this, and when this is proven, when this prediction comes to pass, it will prove, one, that the God of Israel, the God of the Bible, is the true God, and that East Palestine is a prophetic sign from God, the God of Israel, not some New Age God, not an energy God, not a collective consciousness God, not the God of Muhammad, the God of the Bible, but also it will prove wrong and incorrect the other theories that other people have been excited about on the internet with so-called quote-unquote predictive programming as being the explanation for the events of East Palestine and the coincidences that surround East Palestine. And in doing so, I will also prove that all of the other so-called predictive programming coincidences are not so-called predictive programming coincidences. They are prophetic signs from God, if they are real. Naturally, not every one of these so-called predictive programming things that people talk about are more than a figment of their a product of their imagination. But the ones that are real are from God. They're prophetic signs. And this will prove this. This, in other words, will disprove this whole predictive programming nonsense. And it will prove that God does these things. That's the problem. That's the hang up that people that have the predictive programming theory have, is they can't fathom that God would do these things. They perceive these coincidences that they know can't be coincidences, and they don't know what to think. And so, hence the conspiracy theory predictive programming explanations. And those that have these theories that are also Christians or believe in God can't fathom that God would do these things. God doesn't do evil. That's not correct. That's not biblically correct. Okay? God does these things. There's all kinds of passages where we could cite. I'm not going to make this a Bible sermon, a Bible study. Perhaps I should. Maybe I'll do it in another video. But the point here is that God does these things. They are from God. It's God's prerogative to do these things. And the reason why people have the hang up is because they don't correctly understand the Bible. They don't understand the meaning of life. What this is all about. What's going on here with this life that we're in this world. And so God does this. God caused this East Palestine accident. Okay? Not Luciferian FBI agents. Okay? That's the point. God sends evil. They are tragedies. There is evil in them, and God allows this. Let's not forget that God created Satan, and the Bible is filled with passages where God sends this sort of evil. For a deeper explanation as to why these sorts of things are from God, please watch the Willy Wonka prophecy video that I have made that is on this channel. This movie, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, is a gift from God. Definitely. It is brilliant at expressing God's purpose and the meaning of life. And I'm talking about the original classic 1971 Gene Wilder Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, not the Tim Burton, Johnny Depp remake, which is trash. So let's begin. I'm just going to read because I don't know how to begin, but I know that I wrote well when I wrote it. I learned of this incident on Sunday night. This was after I had spent the prior 2 days in deep research on the very same subject. So God was leading me to be researching on this weekend that this was discovered, that this happened. Okay, so on the Saturday and Sunday, God had been leading me independently from this news of East Palestine into researching such things. These mass evacuations, and including the biggest mass evacuation in North American history, the train derailment in Mississauga, Ontario, which is where I was born. Okay? And I only learned about the East Palestine event right after, and literally right after, as soon as I was done researching late on the Sunday night. I clicked on some, I went to find out the news highlights that I typically do. And that was the first thing. It was right after I had finished. And I spent from morning till night the prior 2 days learning about this. And that's what happened. So anyway, that in itself was confirmation for me that this, and as you'll see, there's way more confirmation that the Mississauga train derailment is tied to the East Palestine train derailment. Okay? So what has happened here with this ministry is similar to last October when it was learned that Harris's plane crash will be in St. Louis. And then afterward, realizing that I watched the movie Knowing while staying at the house of my friends in St. Louis. I've only been to St. Louis once. I was there for a month, but I was, that was the time that I was in St. Louis. It was the only time. And it just so happened that was, during that time, I watched this movie Knowing, a movie that God has used. It's a movie from God. It's a prophetic sign. And this movie is about knowing these disasters in advance through numbers, which I explained in I made a video regarding this subject, the Knowing Prophecy video. Make sure you watch it. Okay, but the plot of the movie is essentially this ministry, but the plot involves learning about the precise location and timing of a plane crash. And I know the precise timing and location of the plane crash of Kamala Harris's plane, June 30th, 2023 in St. Louis. But the thing is that I watched the movie Knowing in St. Louis. Okay, so anyway, well, the point here is that what happened with this, movie Knowing and me having watched it in St. Louis is very similar to how I had been just studying the same very thing, and then the next thing I learned is the train derailment in East Palestine that ended up becoming the biggest news story for like a month. Okay. So, next paragraph. It was learned a few days ago that the Lord is using evacuation signs. For example, the evacuation of 70,000 at midnight on the night of the Revelation chapter 12 sign on September 22nd, 2017, due to the threat of the dam breaking in Puerto Rico. Also, the meaning of the bridge collapse in Pittsburgh last January on the morning that Biden was there to speak about infrastructure money, his infrastructure package, that coincidence. It was more than a sign. There was an evacuation. There was more than a sign pointing to Squirrel Hill and the synagogue shooting in Squirrel Hill. But it was bus 61B. Obama was born in 1961. That fell into the ravine. And it was also a 16, which 61 hints at, inch gas pipeline was ruptured. And the strong odor of the gas leak caused an evacuation of the area. So this is an evacuation prophetic sign that's pointing to the evacuation of Manhattan Island. This evacuation, due to the 16-inch gas pipeline rupture, was exactly 16 weeks before the oil pipeline explosion at Harris County, as in Kamala Harris. After her plane crash, the Antichrist will replace her. Bus 61 hints at the 16 number, 4 times 4, the 44th president. Harris County, explosion on the date 7/7, which hints at 49, 7 times 7, and Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president. These are major signs that connect to many things, including 444 days after Kamala Harris in High Point, North Carolina, regarding the jobs and infrastructure package, same thing. And 2.3 trillion, which hints at 23, and God pairs 23 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. And that was also the same day that the first flight of the NASA helicopter Ingenuity on Mars, and on and on. The point being here is that 44 days confirms the 4 times 4 weeks from the 16-inch, which hints at 4 times 4 gas pipeline and evacuation. Okay. All of this evacuation symbolism is pointing to the evacuation of Manhattan Island. So it occurred to me to investigate prior evacuations in history. That's when I started thinking about evacuations in history. The first thing I came across was the biggest evacuation in North American history. I was completely dismayed and humbled. Similar to the realization about St. Louis and the connection to the movie Knowing. The biggest evacuation in North American history occurred in Mississauga, Ontario in 1979, when a freight train derailed and a 5,000-foot high fireball erupted from rail cars transporting chlorine gas. I was born in Mississauga in 1974. This event is one of my earliest memories. I remember this. I remember the police car late at night going down the street and the officer speaking on the megaphone. This was meant to be for me. There are many, many clues and indicators that confirm that my entire life was set out for this ministry. This is one of the biggest. My life began with this incident. Here is yet another example. By pure coincidence, The funeral of the mayor of Mississauga is today, February 14th, 2023. The day I am writing this, I'm learning about the funeral of the mayor of Mississauga. I didn't know. Or maybe I learned the day before, I forget. Honestly, I don't know either way. But I wrote this on the day. The timing for me to write this email happened to be the same day that the mayor of Mississauga, her funeral. Yeah, now it's coming back to me. I would have learned about this a couple of days before this, I think. But anyway, the day that I am coincidentally typing this out for others for the first time is the day of this prophetic funeral. Mayor Hazel McCallion died at age 101 on January 29th, 2023. She was the mayor organizing the emergency response in 1979. In 1979, she was in her first term, having come to office in 1978. She went on to serve as mayor of Mississauga for 36 years. Now, 36 is a prophetic number God uses in his signs as it symbolizes the number 666. Because 36 is 6 times 6, but it is also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6. And the 36th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 36th row is 666. And 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, all the way up to 36, equals 666. And so she was mayor for 36 years. She retired at the age of 93 in 2014. The reason she retired at 93 is because of the upcoming explosion on the surface of the sun, which is 93 million miles away from Earth. This train derailment that she was mayor of during the time is about this massive explosion. It was 5,000 feet high, as I just said. It was seen, from what I recall, from what I read, from across Lake Ontario into New York State. It was seen from many, many miles away. And so that's significant because the sun is many miles away. It's 93 million miles away. And she died at the age of 93. And the big judgment coming is the explosion on the surface of the sun. And in fact, the explosion, dirty bomb in Manhattan also points to that, as I explained in other videos. Have you ever heard of a hurricane hitting Toronto, Ontario? The deadliest natural disaster in Canada since the beginning of the 20th century was a hurricane that hit Toronto in 1954. The nature of the weather pattern of this hurricane was like an atmospheric river, and it essentially focused its destruction on Toronto. It is called Toronto's perfect storm, and Toronto was largely unprepared for such a weather event. 81 deaths. 9 times 9 equals 81, and in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. Also, 911 hints at 9 divided by 11 equals 0.8181 into infinity. And so the number 81 is also symbolism for the 9/11 judgment warning. In this hurricane that focused its destruction on Toronto, of all places, because of its atmospheric river, there were 81 deaths, which is 9 times 9. The name of this hurricane? It was Hurricane Hazel. This is how Hazel McCallion, the mayor of Mississauga for 36 years, got her nickname Hurricane Hazel. Mississauga is next to Toronto, along the shoreline of Lake Ontario. In other words, this was God's purpose for this hurricane, to lend McCallion this nickname, in order to confirm that this mayor is a prophetic judgment sign from God. The Mississauga train derailment became known as the Mississauga Miracle. Not one soul perished. Naturally, Hurricane Hazel McCallion, was deemed a hero for the action she took in the evacuation crisis. She even broke her ankle in the emergency crisis. 220,000 people evacuated Mississauga. By the way, there were 220,000 deaths in the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. 220 equals 2 times 110 stories of the Twin Towers. 220 also equals rock, which equals Jesus, because the 220th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word for rooster. Peter symbolizes rooster, or rooster symbolizes Peter. And the name Peter is Petros in Greek, which means rock. Also in Bible prophecy, there are 2 periods of numbers of days that symbolize the end times period. In Daniel chapter 8, 2,300 days, and in Daniel chapter 9, 2,520 days. And 2,300 plus 220 is 2,520. This isn't the beginning of this evacuation story and prophetic sign, though. Not even close. This story involving Toronto and Mississauga especially predates this evacuation. This history designed by God begins with another evacuation, the exodus from Montreal to Toronto. The separatist political party in Quebec came to power in 1976. In 1978, they enacted Bill 101, Bill 101 or Bill 101, which regarded French language rights. This was in truth minority oppression laws. Laws unparalleled anywhere else in the quote-unquote free world. Bill 101 is why Hazel McCallion died at age 101. She came to power in Mississauga in 1978 at the time that Mississauga was expanding rapidly due to the biggest migration of people in North America in the 20th century. 300,000 Anglophones fled Montreal. Prior to this exodus from Montreal, Montreal was Canada's premier city. And so the story of the Mississauga evacuation is tied to the evacuation exodus of Montreal. The huge number of people that evacuated due to the train derailment in Mississauga in 1979 were living in Mississauga largely due to the exodus from Montreal. The exodus from Montreal parallels the exodus in the Bible. For example, the majority of Egyptians were filled with hate and jealousy of the success of the Jews in Goshen. Likewise, the resentment of the French of the English in Montreal. Montreal was a majority English city not too long ago and was largely built by Anglophones. In history, the French were directed by the Catholic Church to remain rural. Thus, Montreal was built by Anglophones and was an English city. The story of Montreal is that it is an island that was at one point in history a majority English. It was the English that made the city Montreal. And in history, the Catholic Church directed the French to remain rural and not be a part of the city of Montreal on the island of Montreal. As a result, the French didn't prosper at the pace that the English prospered. Likewise, in Egypt, the Hebrews in Goshen prospered at a pace that the Egyptians didn't. Likewise, Goshen, the area that the Jews were living in ancient Egypt, was in the Nile River Delta. Montreal Island is situated in a river. Likewise, Goshen was situated in a river. These two cities are about a river. Egypt, of course, is about the Nile River, a major river in Africa, and likewise the St. Lawrence River is a major river in North America. The oppressive language laws parallel the laws that enslaved the Jews in Exodus. Interestingly, Montreal was the home of the largest Jewish community in Canada prior to 1976. And now Toronto is the home of the largest Jewish community. Here is the thing. The Anglophone community evacuated Montreal. It was an exodus and is still ongoing. The city of Montreal is not only surrounded by French-speaking Quebec, but the city of Montreal is located on an island, Montreal Island. This hints at the evacuation of Manhattan Island. In order to confirm all of this epic history as a prophetic sign, God has incorporated Mayor Hazel McCallion, Hurricane Hazel, as well. In which direction did the Hebrews flee Egypt? The evacuation went east. This is the reason for this evacuation of East Palestine, which is of course hinting at Israel, due to a train derailment and toxic gas. And again, this train derailment and toxic gas, this train derailment in East Palestine is hinting back to the train derailment in Mississauga and the release of toxic gas. Both of these train derailments also included explosions, and it is expected that there will be a dirty bomb explosion that will lead to the release of radioactive material, which will induce the evacuation of Manhattan Island. God also made it so that the names of the state and province in which these two explosive train derailment events rhyme together. East Palestine, Ohio rhymes with Mississauga, Ontario. Ohio and Ontario both begin and end with the letter O. The prophetic numbers that confirm this. God has incorporated the numbers to confirm what I have just said, which is that all of this is a prediction or is confirmation of the prediction of the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan and then the evacuation of Manhattan Island. The East Palestine train derailment on February 3rd, 2023 is 1,656 hours before the evacuation of Manhattan on April 13th. Noah and his family evacuated 1,656 years after Adam. In other words, in the Bible, this number 1,656 is associated with an evacuation. The first Jewish grave in Montreal is marked 1776. Mayor Hazel McCallion, Hurricane Hazel, died 1776 hours before it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, which will lead to a mass evacuation of Manhattan Island. 1776 also, of course, hints at America. It symbolizes America. But 1776 is also 4 times 444. And America, which was founded on 13 colonies in 1776, will be persecuted by the American Antichrist, the 44th president. And also in the Bible, the number 13, as in 13 colonies, is also symbolism for the Antichrist. As Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham, Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month, and the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. East Palestine is located in Columbiana County, and God uses in his big picture of signs the name Columbia or Columbus as symbolism for the nation of America. And so this isn't just a sign for Ohio, it is of course a judgment sign or judgment warning sign for the nation of America, which also includes North America, including Canada. 1656 hours, or 1,656 hours, is 69 days. And this also hints at Daniel chapter 9, the most central prophecy in the Bible, regarding the 70 weeks prophecy. After a period of 69 weeks, the 70th week is symbolic of the beginning of the end times period and the Antichrist's rule. And the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan is part of the process that is leading to the rise of the Antichrist. This is only scratching the surface for the related numbers between this story and the big picture of signs. At a state dinner in Ottawa, President Richard Nixon gave a toast, quote, "To the future Prime Minister of Canada," unquote, referring to 4-month-old Justin Trudeau. There is something known as the Nixon prophecy. This is the Nixon prophecy. At a state dinner in Ottawa, President Richard Nixon gave a toast, quote, "To the future Prime Minister of Canada," unquote, referring to 4-month-old Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau became the 23rd Prime Minister exactly 7 years after President Obama was elected the 44th president. God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the 44th president, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 in high school. God pairs 23 and 44 together in his prophetic signs to confirm the signs and connections, as the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. Also, this 70th week that I just mentioned in Daniel chapter 9 is in fact a period of symbolic 7 years. This symbolic 7 years in Bible prophecy regards the period of the end times and the rule of the Antichrist. And so the 23rd Prime Minister just happened to be elected exactly 7 years after Obama, the 44th president, was elected for the first time. And Obama was elected on the date November 4th. And presidential elections are on the first Tuesday of the month of November. But that isn't the case with Canadian elections. They can be at any time of the year, on any date of the year. And it just so happens that the first election of Justin Trudeau, the 23rd Prime Minister, was exactly 7 years after the election of the 44th president on this date, November 4th, which is 11-4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44. They, Obama and Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, had a state dinner exactly in Washington, D.C., exactly 44 years to the month after the Richard Nixon toast to 4-month-old Justin Trudeau, Justin's father, Pierre Trudeau. Here is a clip of Obama talking about the Richard Nixon prophecy. Here is a clip of Obama talking about the Richard Nixon prophecy at this state dinner.
So tonight, history comes full circle. 44 years ago, President Nixon made a visit to Ottawa, and he was hosted by Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Deserves a toast. At a private dinner, there was a toast. Tonight, we'll dispense with the formalities, President Nixon said. I'd like to propose a toast to the future Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Pierre Trudeau. He was 4 months at the time. All these years later, the prediction has come to pass.
And so because the Antichrist, Barack Obama, is talking about this prophecy that is from God at this state dinner, this lends us confirmation that this state dinner with Trudeau and Obama is also a prophecy from God. It is also a prophetic sign. This meeting of the 44th president and the 23rd prime minister that were elected exactly 7 years apart, and this state dinner was shortly after Justin Trudeau was elected. There is a very good reason why God is tying Richard Nixon, Pierre Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau together in this prophetic sign, this Nixon prophecy and this Obama-Trudeau state dinner. There is a reason why these three men are brought together by God, and I'll explain this. And first, Pierre Trudeau is known for having enacted the War Measures Act. The War Measures Act during the Quebec terrorist crisis, which hints at the extremely prophetic Emergency Act, because the Emergency Act evolved from the War Measures Act, enacted by his son, the only other time that such an act was enacted in Canadian history, Justin Trudeau, in the 44th Parliament. The 23rd Prime Minister enacted the Emergencies Act in the 44th Parliament, and his father, Pierre Trudeau, is known for enacting the War Measures Act, which was the predecessor to the Emergency Act, which strips constitutional rights. During that state dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2015, in his toast to Justin, Obama said he had visited Burlington and Mississauga, Ontario. He only mentioned these two cities at first. He didn't mention this, but this was because Obama could not make it to his sister's wedding, and so he visited her and her husband at their home in Burlington and ate dinner at Summit Garden Restaurant in nearby Mississauga. Now, Summit hints at high place, and the word high place in Hebrew is Bama. In fact, the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. And Jesus said in Luke 10:18 that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. The word Barak in Hebrew is lightning, and in the language Jesus would have spoken, the word from is O, Aramaic. The word from is O in Aramaic. And Bama in Hebrew is high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. As, for example, it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, a metaphor for heaven. And also, the high places is a euphemism in the Bible for the false religious worship of false gods, which is the biggest transgression, the first commandment, the high places, because the Jews would worship their false gods on the tops of mountains. And so anyway, the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, Barack Obama. And so I'll just repeat that. Justin Trudeau is getting a toast from Barack Obama, who said he had visited Burlington and Mississauga, the only two cities he mentioned at first, and this is because he was visiting his sister in Burlington, and they ate dinner at Summit Garden, which hints at the high place, the summit of a mountain peak, restaurant in nearby Mississauga. In the toast, Obama made a joke out of how he couldn't pronounce Mississauga, and said the name Mississauga 3 times. I'll just play a clip of this.
Before I ever became president, when we celebrated my sister and Conrad's marriage, Michelle and I took our daughters to Canada. And we went to Burlington, and this is always tough. Mississauga. And then we went to Toronto and Niagara Falls. Mississauga. I can do that.
Mississauga is the 7th most populous city in Canada. At this prophetic state dinner, the Antichrist said that he had been to Canada, and he said the name Mississauga 3 times, and Mississauga is the 7th most populous city in Canada. This is a clear 3 sets of 7 prophetic sign. God uses frequently in his prophetic signs 3 sets of 7s, because in the account of Joshua, the Hebrews marched around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho 7 times, once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. This was a prophetic 3 sets of 7, and there are also in the judgment account of the Noah's flood three sets of 7. Then the walls of security fell and collapsed in Jericho due to God's judgment. And this is symbolism for judgment on America, including from the border wall of security. In other words, they blew trumpets before the walls collapsed, including one long last trumpet blast. And in English, in archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. And Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security. That was designed as a prophetic parallel with the book of Joshua. America also has another border wall of security, which is the northern border. And that's why the truckers the trucker convoy was a drive from the west coast to Ottawa that paralleled along the border, because that's what Canada is. It's essentially a long strip of land along the American border, because the north of that is uninhabitable. But the convoy went from across Canada parallel the border wall, the border. And what were they doing? As everyone knows, they were blowing their horns, which was symbolism for trumpets. In other words, it was a symbolism for a march around the walls of Jericho while they blew trumpets. And what were they known for in Ottawa? Blowing their horns outside of Parliament, around the perimeter of Parliament, and clogging the streets while the trucks blew their horns. It was judgment on the Parliament that was about to enact the Emergencies Act. And when did they do that? When did the 23rd Prime Minister begin debate on the Emergency Act in the 44th Parliament? On February 17th, 2022. Prior to that date, I was making videos predicting that there would be a prophetic sign on that date. And then this is what happened. It was the Emergency Act. And on that day of the Emergency Act, well, first of all, let's finish that with the date itself. It's also symbolic because February 17th is the 17th day of the second month. And in the account of Noah's flood, it began on the 17th day of the second month. And it began with 3 sets of 7. Also, on 9/11, it was 2 planes that struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart. And that's also what the date 2/17 hints at, the 9/11 judgment warning, when the 110 stories of the Twin Towers collapsed and Joshua died at the age of 110. And he led the Hebrews, around the walls that collapsed in God's judgment. And furthermore, the collapse of the Twin Towers of the 110 stories engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which hints at the walls of security of Jericho and Joshua. And the reason why Wall Street in this is because it pointed to George Washington, the first president, the founding of the country, when after his inauguration at Federal Hall on Wall Street that was cracked due to the earthquake. And that, again, the walls of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake, by the way. That's proven by archaeology. After the inauguration, George Washington marched down Wall Street. The Hebrews marched around the walls of Jericho to Trinity Chapel at the end of Wall Street, the only building at Ground Zero that survived the falling debris and survived without even a broken window or a scratch, due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree, and on, which I explained in other videos. But the reason why God pointed to Trinity Chapel, which is now nicknamed the Miracle Chapel, is because the only building that survived is because in Trinity Chapel, George Washington consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. That was what God was warning of through the 9/11 events. The removal of the walls of security that America has been blessed with throughout its history. So that's the date, February 17th. And I was predicting for other reasons, other than I just explained, that there would be a major prophetic sign on February 17th. And I didn't know it would be anything to do, because I knew about it long beforehand. I didn't know that it had anything to do with what was going on in Ottawa at the time. But also on that date, on February 17th in Ottawa, there were these Christians that were marching around the perimeter of Ottawa. Now, I used to live in Ottawa, and this is another example of how clearly this ministry, this video, is the reason why for my life. My life was designed for this, and I used to live in Ottawa, so I know this. How they could have marched around Ottawa and how it could have been symbolic of marching around Jericho. You can march around Ottawa, the perimeter of the Parliament, which takes you across the Ottawa River. And before the Hebrews took Jericho, they crossed the Jordan River. This big story in the story of Joshua is how they crossed the Jordan River and how the river waters stopped in a dam and anyway. So they began this marching on the 11th. And when they began their marching, they didn't know, and they probably still don't know the significance of the February 17th, unless they've watched one of my videos. But in the account of Joshua, they marched for 7 days. And on the 7th day, they marched 7 times and blow the trumpets, which would have been the shofar, the sheep's horn. Well, they marched one day, these Christians in Ottawa, they marched around Parliament, judging Parliament, and for 7 days, beginning on the 11th of February, and the 7th day was the 17th of February. And that's the day they marched 7 times around Parliament, and then blew the trumpets. They blew a sheep's horn, a shofar, a biblical horn is what they blew on that 7th day. And that was the day of the Emergency Act. And of course, God is communicating the Emergency Act as a prophetic sign. Because what were they protesting? They were protesting the VACCINE. And in the future, one will not be able to buy food. So the Emergency Act was all about the taking away of the bank accounts of the truckers and those that were supporting them. And in the end, and soon you will not be able, and soon the government will control all purchases of food through digital currency, and you won't be able to buy or sell, as Bible prophecy says, this food unless you have taken the VACCINE. And that's why the Emergency Act in relation to what they were protesting. Now, there's more to this. You know, they were clogging the streets of Ottawa, and they clogged the bridge crossings, and those were arteries. They clogged the main trade artery, and they clogged the streets of Ottawa because that was symbolism for the clogged arteries that are a result of taking the you-know-what. And also, 93 days later, after the Emergency Act signed, was the day of the derecho storm that knocked out power for 900,000 people in Ottawa. Number 9 is the most important number, symbolizes God's judgment. And this derecho storm was a straight line. That's what a derecho is. It's a straight line storm. And where did it exactly begin? It began precisely at the Windsor Bridge, the trade artery, the biggest trade artery between the US and Canada, and for that matter, the biggest border crossing of business for America. That's where the storm began, and it went directly to Ottawa. And the reason for 93 days is because it hints at the 93 million miles away that the sun is. And there's more to this, which I explained in another video, but that was the February 17th was also the day of the release of the new Elvis movie, which is about Elvis, King Elvis, and Sun Records, which is hinting at the sun. And Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, which hints at the Parker probe that's around the sun, going around the sun. And also goat is Antichrist symbolism, and goat stands for greatest of all time. And on the day of the derecho storm, we had the prophetic sign, the Antichrist goat, greatest of all time of boxing, Floyd Mayweather, in a prophetic sign with him in a boxing match, which is explained in the other video. And this Mayweather sign was in May. It was on the day of the derecho storm, May 21st. A derecho storm is weather, hence the Mayweather, Floyd Mayweather sign, which is also hinting at the coming space weather from the sun, which is explained. But also the derecho storm is also a derecho is a type of punch in boxing, and that's the derecho storm was hinting at the punch that's coming soon, next February, from the sun that will cause catastrophic blackouts. And this is why the main thing about the derecho storm was how it knocked out the power, the blackout for 900,000 people in Ottawa, where the Emergency Act was initiated debate on 93 days earlier, which hints at 93 million miles the sun away from Earth. Also, the derecho storm was a straight line, which was symbolism or hinting at the convoy, the straight line of the convoy of the truckers that were blowing their horns, which was communication from God of trumpet judgment along the border wall of security, just like the trumpets were blown. I'll repeat that. This storm that was named in the American media Canada's derecho is a straight line storm, and this was on the other side of the border wall of security of America, and the trucker convoy was all about the blocking of the Windsor Bridge trade artery, and the convoy that went in a straight line across and parallel to the border outside of the border wall of America there. Now, what is astounding beyond words relative to this video, which is the prediction that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on April 13th, 2023, is that the day of this prophetic Emergencies Act on February 17th, 2022, is exactly 420 days before the date it is predicted that there will be an emergency in Manhattan with the predicted dirty bomb explosion and mass evacuation of Manhattan Island. This is astounding because in the Bible, 7 times in Bible prophecy, there is a period of 42 months as related to the period of the Antichrist in the end times. And so 420 days hints at the number 42, which is symbolism for the end times period of the Antichrist. However, also, the number 42 appears in the Bible, including in the Old Testament, in context of slaughter. For example, in the Old Testament, there were 42 cities in which people could seek refuge for manslaughter. Also, the she-bear in 2 Kings slaughtered 42 boys. Also, 42 descendants of King Ahab were slaughtered at the pit by King Jehu. Likewise, the number 42 in the book of Revelation is in context of the Antichrist and the coming slaughter from the Antichrist. And so that's also why this is astounding, because this is what we are talking about from this Emergencies Act, which is also symbolic of an emergency. It is exactly 420 days to the date it is predicted that there will be a slaughter in Manhattan. Also, the reason why 420 is prophetic is because it is a divisor of God's end times number, which is 2,520 from Bible prophecy. 2,520 divided by 420 is 6. And it just so happens that 420 days is exactly 60 weeks, which is more confirmation of this. The fact that 420 is prophetic because it is a divisor along with the number 6 of 2,520. And man was created on the 6th day, which is why the number of the Antichrist is 666. And for those that don't know, the days mentioned in the account of Genesis of creation are not referring to 24-hour periods. Okay, so returning back to this 44th president and the Richard Nixon prophecy, we have 44 years exactly to the month after the toast to the 4-month-old Justin Trudeau. We have in 2015 Barack Obama giving a toast to Justin Trudeau. And he's saying that he has been to Burlington and Mississauga. And he says the name Mississauga 3 times. And Mississauga is the 7th most populous city in Canada. And so this is a clear 3 sets of 7. Which again, we have a 3 sets of 7 in Ottawa on that day with the Christians marching around Parliament, judging in judgment from God, God's people demonstrating his judgment on Canada, because Canada and America are about to be destroyed. All right, so the dinner so the state dinner and mention of Mississauga, the location of the biggest evacuation in North American history, which will be a big emergency for which the Emergencies Act hints at, which ties to the evacuation of Montreal Island, was exactly 370 weeks before the predicted evacuation of Manhattan Island. This is so mind-boggling. When I learned this, I learn like things like this all the time, but it's just so amazing. It's exactly 370 weeks. 370 weeks hints at 3 sets of 7 in the state dinner. There was a 3 sets of 7 in the state dinner because Mississauga is the 7th most populous city, and Barack Obama, in his attempt to make a joke, he mentioned Mississauga 3 times, and exactly 370 weeks from that day, which hints at 3 sets of 7, is the date it is predicted that there will be a mass evacuation from Manhattan Island. And Mississauga was the place of the biggest mass evacuation in North American history. After correcting his Mississauga pronunciation joke, he quickly said, okay, I'm going to say this now. I might say it later because I can't remember everything that I wrote. But Mississauga is made up of 11 letters, and so is New York City. That's another connection here. So from, Obama's mentioning Mississauga 3 times, the 7th most populous city in Canada, a name that's made up of 11 letters, it is exactly 370 weeks, which hints at 3 sets of 7, to the predicted date of the dirty bomb explosion in New York City. And New York City is made up of 11 letters. And in the Bible, the number 11 is symbolism for the execution of God's judgment. It appears in context of the execution of God's judgment in the Bible. And that's why, for example, on 9/11, it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that hit the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, a name that's made up of 11 letters, because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in the last chance for America to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction, and likewise Canada. Okay, because arguably Canada and America both are God's Gentile nations. There are only 2 nations in history that were founded on a relationship with God, America and Israel. And Canada was, the colonies were American until they had a civil war, the Revolutionary War, which created the border between Canada and the U.S. Okay. So after correcting his Mississauga pronunciation joke, he quickly said, quote, and then we went to Toronto and Niagara Falls, as like an afterthought. That was part of his joke. He's like, and then we went to Toronto and Niagara Falls, the places that everyone's heard about and are easy to pronounce. Okay, so Niagara Falls is also, of course, prophetic. It is a high place. Bama, the name, as I mentioned earlier, the name Bama is Hebrew for high place. But also, 3 sets of 7 relate to the fall of the walls of security of Jericho, as well Niagara Falls and the barge are Noah's flood symbolism, and there are 3 sets of 7 in the account of Noah's flood. So let me explain. God is using Niagara Falls in his prophetic signs, and specifically it's about this historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River since 1918, the year, not coincidentally, of the Spanish flu pandemic. And this barge moved for the first time in 2019. That's another sign that's talked about in other videos. But Niagara Falls is symbolism for the power of water moving over the earth. It's symbolism for Noah's flood. The barge is symbolism for Noah's Ark. And the barge was involved in the most historic, dramatic rescue in Niagara Falls history, involving the U.S. Coast Guard, which brings in American national symbolism. And this rescue, of course, with this barge, is hinting at the rescue of Noah and his family in the ark. Also, Niagara Falls engenders a perennial rainbow. And the rainbow is God's sign regarding judgment in the account of Noah's flood. In the last verse, verse 9:17, and Obama was president from 2009 until 2017, and Obama is the rainbow president, who famously lit up the White House in rainbow colors. Okay, on the 9th of Tammuz, and the 9th and 17th of Tammuz were the two dates in history when the Babylonians and the Romans breached the walls of security. That's another reason for 9 and 17, and why Obama was president from 2009 until 2017. Okay, so not to get off onto that rabbit trail any further, the point here, though, is that in this prophetic state dinner, the Antichrist said that he had been to Niagara Falls. So the dirty bomb in Manhattan will be exactly 1,260 days after the barge moved. Okay, so there we go. This is relevant, extremely relevant, actually. The date of the predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan will be 1,260 days exactly after the barge moved on October 31st, 2019, which was a 9/11 symbolism storm. So first, let me explain. 1,260 days is mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy as being the period of the Antichrist's rule in the end times. It's extremely prophetic. It's 3.5 biblical years, prophetic years, made up of 12 months of 30-day months. The barge moved because of the Halloween storm. It was this big storm that knocked out all kinds of power in the area and created epic historic flooding in eastern New York State and western New England. And that's because God was pointing at the flight paths of the 2 planes from New England that slammed into the 2 towers in New York on 9/11. They went over this area, and there was 1 death, which confirms the prophetic significance of this, because the death lends to this. If you know God's signs, the 1 death is symbolically important. And so that's why it was a 9/11 sign. And there's way more to that, which I won't get into. Well, I suppose I have to add a couple of things here. This was the day of the beginning of the Maria fire in California, which burned 9,999 acres. That's, if you look it up on Wikipedia, that's what it says. It's 9,999 acres. This day of the Maria fire and the barge moving for the first time in 101 years. By the way, and that in itself is a pairing of 9 and 11, because 101 hints at 11, as does Bill 101. Oh, I didn't even realize that till I was recording this just now, because of course we're talking about Hazen McCallion, who died at the age of 101, and Bill 101, and that's what really this is all about, because this hints at the Mark of the Beast laws, which is what the Emergencies Act hints at, which is the not being able to buy or sell unless you take the thing. And that's the oppressive minority laws, which is hinted at through the exodus of the people from Montreal, which points to the Bible, and the exodus from the persecution of Pharaoh in Egypt, and a type for the Antichrist. And so anyway, this barge moved for the first time in 101 years. And on the same day, it was the 9,999 acres. And that, of course, hints at 9/11. God pairs 9 and 11 together to confirm the signs and connections. And that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as said is required in the Bible. And that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different than unique than everything else that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs on the internet. And so also, this was a 9/11 sign, as I just explained, this moving of the barge for the first time on the day of the 9/11 storm in eastern New York and western New England, which points at the flight paths of the planes on 9/11. But also, it was exactly 110 weeks after the evacuation in the middle of the night due to the threat of the dam bursting in Puerto Rico that was caused by Hurricane Maria. And so the 9,999 acres connects with the 110 weeks exactly from the Maria fire back to the Maria hurricane and the dam threat, which was a prophetic sign. And there's more to that because it was the day of the Revelation chapter 12 sign, which is about a birth. And Maria, of course, is that's what's hinted at, was the woman that gives the birth in Revelation chapter 12. But anyway, that's the 110 weeks, and that's also 9/11 because there was 110 stories of the Twin Towers that collapsed. And so that's why the 9,999 acres connects with exactly 110 weeks to the Hurricane Maria. But also Hurricane Maria killed about 3,000, quote, about 3,000, because on 9/11 it was 2,996 deaths officially. And in the book of Exodus, when the Hebrews exodus from Egypt, at Mount Sinai after their rebellion, quote unquote, about 3,000 souls perished. And that's what God was pointing to with the 2,996 souls that perished on 9/11. And also there was about 3,000 deaths due to Hurricane Maria. Also, the barge moved for the first time in 101 years, which again hints at Bill 101 and the connection to the train derailments in East Palestine and Mississauga. And Bill 101 and Hazel McCallion, Hurricane Hazel McCallion, speaking of storms, because the barge moved because of a storm. 101 years also hints at 11. You take away the 0, you get 11. And that's also 9/11, as I just explained. But also, it's predicted that 1,260 days after this will be the day of the predicted dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan, New York City, which is a name made up of 11 letters in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union. One thing I don't think I emphasized enough is that the barge moved for the first time in 101 years, exactly 110 weeks, which is also hinting at 11, after the evacuation in the middle of the night. 70,000 people were evacuated in the middle of the night due to the threat of the dam bursting. And they had to go knocking on doors because of the power outage. There was no phones. Most of the residents were relying on phones. And so they had to go knocking on door to doors in the middle of the night, warning them, which is hinting at Matthew 25 and the midnight cry and the evacuation of God's people at the rapture. But anyway, that's more emphasis of this evacuation symbolism. And as I've just explained, it's exactly 110 weeks from that evacuation, 70,000 people, to the barge moving for the first time. The Maria Dam and the Maria hurricane that caused the dam damage, that threatened the dam burst, that's all Noah's flood symbolism, as is Niagara Falls and the barge, as I just explained. So anyway, it's 110 weeks exactly between those two, and then another 1,260 days, as I'm saying, from the barge moving to the day of the predicted evacuation in Manhattan, in the 11th state to join the Union. But anyway, 1,260 days from this barge sign, which is symbolic of beginning of judgment, because when the barge finally crashes over Niagara Falls, which is predicted to occur, by the way, on February 17th, the 17th day of the second month in 2024, that will be a massive symbolic sign of the beginning of judgment. The explosion on the surface of the sun will be 120 hours later. And in the account of Noah's flood, on the 22nd of February, and in the account of Noah's flood, God gave Noah the number 120 in regards to the timing of the beginning of judgment. Okay, so where was I? So, okay, also, Toronto and Mississauga, for that matter, are symbolism for the Tower of Babel story. This is represented by the CN Tower, and the immigrants speaking a multitude of languages from all over the world. That's essentially Toronto. It isn't a Canadian city. It's an international city, and that's by design by the godless globalists that seek to make the world international and eliminate nationalism and patriotism. And when the place you live in is overwhelmed by other cultures, you don't really feel like you are from there anymore, like myself, for example, because obviously it doesn't mean anything. And that's the whole point of bringing in multitudes of people that's from all over the world. But anyway, Toronto is one of these Anglosphere cities that really epitomizes this, like Sydney or London. And it also is known for its tower. So this is really, truly a Tower of Babel city. Truly, literally, right? symbolically. It's not an accident. And that's why this comes up in this prophetic sign, in fact, why Obama is mentioning it. Because the Tower of Babel city is all about the Antichrist. Nimrod and the Tower of Babel is a type for the Antichrist and the world coming together under his rule, the Tower of Babel. And in the name of technocracy, in the name of technology, the tower, the building of the tower, that, you know, the attempt to reach God, to reach the heavens and to become like God, and conquer the creation by man without God, is symbolic of today's technocratic movement and authoritarianism involving the thing that people take, which is originally, I'm going to try to say this without saying the word, it's originally designed for changing, modifying one's chromosomes, okay, if you know what I mean. That's what the technology is. But it's technocracy and transhumanism, the modern day form of eugenics, which is the rule of the elite, the experts. They get, they dictate, and that's essentially authoritarianism, and free speech must be censored because the elites must be able to dictate because they know best, the technocrats. Okay, anyway, so that's another subject though. But going on, that's what Tower of Babel is here in this story here, Toronto. So as I wrote, this is represented by the CN Tower and the immigrants, as I just said, speaking a multitude of languages from all over the world. The Tower of Babel story is right after the flood, and that's why in Obama's toast, he mentions Toronto and Niagara Falls right after each other. He visited those two places right after one another. Also, Obama said he visited Burlington and Mississauga. Coincidentally, these are the very two cities I grew up in and went to high school in. These are the two cities I went to high school in, which is more confirmation that it is God's plan that I discover this, for example, exact 370 weeks connection from the date that Obama said this. Who else could have remembered he said this and then looked this up? I mean, I grew up and went to high school in Burlington and Mississauga, and Obama mentions these two places, and no one else could have done this. No one else could have looked up how many days it is between that and the dirty bomb explosion that's predicted in Manhattan to find that it's exactly 370 weeks, which hints at 3 sets of 7. And Obama mentioned Mississauga 3 times, and Mississauga is the 7th most populous city, which is the 3 sets of 7. So in other words, this 370 weeks connection is amazing beyond words confirmation that the story of Mississauga and Montreal Island is a prophecy that points to Manhattan Island. And it's also confirmation that this video I am making was part of the plan for my life. But so anyway, yes. So the point is that the personal connection is also in itself, if you will, just more confirmation of this story and connection between the evacuation and exodus of Montreal and Mississauga and the coming predicted evacuation of Manhattan Island. Now, to bring this full circle, the reason why God brought these 3 men together, as I mentioned, with this Nixon prophecy and this fulfillment of the Nixon prophecy with this state dinner between Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama. The 3 men I'm talking about are Richard Nixon, Pierre Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau. Is that what is Richard Nixon known for? Richard Nixon is known for Watergate. What is Watergate? Besides Noah's flood symbolism, which is explained in other videos or elsewhere in this video. Watergate is about how Richard Nixon used the federal government and weaponized the federal government, or tried to weaponize the federal government in order to persecute his political opponents, which is exactly what the Emergency Act is, enacted by Justin Trudeau. And if you don't recognize that, that's because, no offense, but you have been susceptible to the propaganda or you really are a true believer of the political cult of the left and you're just blinded, and you really do see yourself as morally superior, and you really do see the truckers as being a threat. Either way, the point is that that's what God is communicating, and the prediction in this video, the purpose of this prediction that is from God, is to prove the things that I am saying. That is the purpose of it, of this prediction. And what I am saying is that God is saying that the Emergencies Act is a prophetic sign, a foreshadow, a hint at what is coming, which is the political persecution through the weaponization of government, of political opponents in this developing literal civil war between secularists, materialists, liberals, leftists, and conservatives and true Christians. That's the civil war. And anyway, this is all prophetic because if you are not aware, Bible prophecy talks about Christians being persecuted at the end by the Antichrist. That's the point. And the thing, the VACCINE, is merely, although maybe some people aren't conscious of it, but it is a fact that it is simply a weapon used by one segment of the population on the other. It's to demonize, it's used to demonize the other half that see it as being unethical and unrighteous and among other things, and unnecessary and deadly. And even though the information regarding that is overwhelming, the members of the political cult ignore it and see them taking the thing as an act of fealty to the cult. It's a demonstration of commitment to the ideology and the cult. So anyway, but that's what it's all about. It's a spiritual war. It's a civil war, but it's also a political war. It's an ideological war, and one side is propping themselves up by virtue signaling with these COVID things to signal to the other members of their tribe that they are superior. That's what masks are, for example. Every cult uses some form of clothing modification to induce tribal affiliation between each other and to separate themselves, distinguish themselves from the other group, and to encourage indoctrination. Political cults, and there are different kinds. There's political, religious, health cults. There's 4 different kinds from what I recall. But this is a political cult, and if you have the eyes to see it, a religious cult. Because for the godless left, there's a void, and they've made politics, their religion, as a replacement religion, the political left. And anyway, that's the reason for the masks. Of course, prior to COVID, there was no all of the scientific papers demonstrated overwhelmingly that there was no need for masks, and every government, every modern developed government, had as its contingency plan for a possible pandemic the advice to not wear masks, but all that changed on a dime due to things which that's just going off onto a rabbit trail. Just follow the science is the most unscientific thing that has ever been said in the history of science. And the science in this case was overwhelmingly the case that obviously the cloth things don't work because, for example, the virus is a half a micron in size and cloth things don't filter out anything above or below 3 microns, just for example. But also they're unhealthy and spiritually they're dark. They symbolize the erosion of the sovereign individual person, which is inherent in collectivist, satanic, demonic ideologies. My point here, I guess, just to summarize again, is that the reason for Richard Nixon and Pierre Trudeau, and the two prime ministers in Canadian history that enacted these Emergencies Act that stripped civil rights, and it's all because God. That's what God's pointing to. It's the mark of the Antichrist laws that will be used to persecute their enemies, true conservatives and Christians. And another thing too is that Pierre Trudeau enacted the War Measures Act during the crisis that was the result of the political cult of the French separatists, which is related to the exodus from Montreal Island. And so it all ties together, because what we are talking about is how the exodus of Montreal Island is connecting to the mass evacuation of Manhattan Island through these train derailments and evacuations in Mississauga and East Palestine. And so the War Measures Act was enacted. It's all connected because it connects to the history of Montreal and the reason for the exodus to Mississauga. These evacuations also point to the evacuation of the rapture, which is why the train derailed in Mississauga 7 minutes before midnight. The midnight cry in Matthew 25. So Jesus told a parable of the midnight cry in Matthew 25, chapter 25. And the cry at midnight is symbolism for the rapture. And evacuations are symbolism for the rapture. God's people being evacuated. For example, Noah and his family were evacuated in the ark. And it is said that the ark was lifted up high above the earth. And it is said that those that will be raptured from the Antichrist will fly in the sky, in the clouds. They'll meet Jesus in the clouds. This is also why Hazel McCallion, Hurricane Hazel, died 390 days before February 22nd, 2023, the date it is predicted that the sun will explode, or rather there will be an explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause catastrophic power outages, and also the eruption of Yellowstone volcano, which in turn connects prophetically, as I explained in other videos, with 13 weeks and anyway, it's explained in other videos, but it connects to the date of the rapture, May 26th, 2024. But this 390 days connection is prophetic because not only does 390 days, is it a major, important prophetic number of days in the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 4, but also the 390th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word return, which the Apostle James used when he quoted Amos 9:11, the prophet Amos in the Old Testament, 9:11, when God said that he would return to rebuild his temple, which is referring to the end times, the second coming. And so that's why this is relevant, because the second coming will be at the rapture. Okay, so the evacuation of East Palestine also hints at the eastward exodus from Goshen to the Promised Land. East Palestine is on a river, and it's on the border. So that's also hinting at, the crossing of the Red Sea and the crossing of the Jordan River, the border of the Promised Land. So that's also why East Palestine. Because when the Hebrews crossed into the Promised Land, they were crossing from east of Palestine, if you will. And so anyway, all of this is symbolism for the rapture. There's one more prophetic aspect of Obama's prophetic speech at this prophetic state dinner, which is when he cracked a joke about how Senator Ted Cruz was running for president and had been born in Calgary. As you'll see, Obama is somewhat uncomfortable as he says this. And this is because, of course, he knows the biggest lie in all of history is that he was born in the US and not in Kenya. But that's explained in other videos. One thing too here is that it's prophetic that this senator's name is Cruz, which is Spanish for cross. And the point here is that Obama is making a joke about someone running for president that wasn't born in the US and he wasn't born in the US. In other words, God designed the circumstances of Senator Ted Cruz's life, who was born in Calgary and ran for president at this time of the state dinner here, in order for this prophetic sign in this extremely prophetic state dinner.
In both of our countries. And we see this in our current presidential campaign. After all, where else could a boy born in Calgary grow up to run for President of the United States?
I think I want to emphasize one thing before moving on here. I want to emphasize how important Bill 101 is. So Hazel McCallion died at the age of 101, a prophetic 1,656 hours before it is predicted that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, causing the evacuation of Manhattan Island. And Hurricane Hazel, Hazel McCallion, was the mayor at the beginning of her tenure as mayor during the mass evacuation of Mississauga due to a train derailment and the explosion and the release of toxic gas. So, but Bill 101 is also tying into this story about Obama and the Nixon prophecy and Justin Trudeau, who enacted the Emergency Act, because 1976, which is when the Quebec Party, the Separatist Party, came into power in Quebec, which led to the exodus of Montreal, they enacted Bill 101, which was these oppressive minority laws, which paralleled, as I said, the oppressive minority laws in Egypt when the Jews were slaves to the king of Egypt. And this story in the Bible, in the book of Exodus, regards these oppressive laws that the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, passed regarding the minority Hebrews. In other words, they were oppressive minority laws, just like Bill 101. So that's the parallel with the Bible there, this Bill 101, right? But the Bill 101, more importantly, is also pointing to, like I was talking about, how people will not be able to buy or sell food. This civil war that is leading to, because it's all politics, including COVID, it's all politics. And the thing, the VACCINE, is really, whether it's recognized consciously or not, it's used as a weapon to persecute their enemy, which is true Christians, conservative Christians, their arch enemy, the godless left's arch enemy, true conservative Christians. And it's a way of separating them, like Nazi Germany, like the stars on the armband, right, for the Jews. First it was, you can't go to the movies, you can't eat the restaurants, just like COVID, right? But it's leading to, of course, genocide. Of course. That's another subject, which I explain in the absolute must-watch trucker prophecy video, the trucker convoy prophecy video. And make sure you watch that video. I hesitate to say the most important video because, this one is too, but make sure you watch that video. One of the most important videos, the trucker convoy prophecy video. But anyway, Bill 101 is hinting at these upcoming laws, like Nazi laws, that separate the society into two camps, and the untouchables, the degenerates, the ones, the anti-VACCINEers, right? Though the deplorables, as Hillary Clinton put it. So anyway, that's what's happening. So Bill 101 is about the same thing. It's oppressive minority laws. That's what's coming. That's the huge significance of Bill 101 in all of this. This is what it's all about, actually, this Bill 101. The mass evacuation of Manhattan is all leading to the mark of the Antichrist, described in Bible prophecy. That's what I'm talking about. The mark of the Antichrist will be these laws enacted on those that don't take the VACCINE and how they won't be able to purchase food. And so that's what Bill 101 is all pointing to, including the Emergency Act, which is the stripping of bank accounts, which is the way in which people will not be able to buy food. It'll all be regulated through digital currency, and it'll all be set up that sellers and buyers won't be able to do that. They will not be allowed to buy and sell food. And make no mistake, the purpose of this prediction from God is to prove this. It is to prove what I have just said. One of the purposes for this prediction is to establish that the main conclusions being stated in this video are fact. That is the purpose for this prediction. Therefore, there is no debate regarding the information that I will be presenting. If there were to continue to be a debate on the information I will be presenting, there is no purpose for the prediction. In other words, the information is controversial, but that is the reason for the prediction, to end the controversy. It is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. And to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, and it is to miss the point of this video and video channel. This is how prophecy works. This is how God proves things. This is why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy, in order to prove that it is the Word of God. Jesus said to those that doubted him, if they didn't believe what he had said, then they should believe the works. They should believe the healings and miracles that Jesus did. In the description box below, I will leave a link to the video titled God's Purpose for These Predictions. Okay, continuing on with the emails that I wrote. I forgot to mention that Montreal is French for Royal Mount, Mount Royal, which hints at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This is the reason for the prophetic signs in Montreal involving Obama, including another prophetic dinner he had with Justin Trudeau in Montreal, which is explained in other videos. Pharaoh in Egypt, a type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Hebrews out of Goshen in Egypt. Obama will persecute God's people and rule the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Also, Bill 101 is symbolism for the mark of the beast laws that Obama and Justin Trudeau will enforce. Again, this also ties to Pierre Trudeau and the Nixon prophecy. And these two Trudeaus enacted the emergency powers that also symbolize the mark of the beast laws. So that's what I was just explaining a minute ago. Again, this Bill 101 is the huge significance of all of this. The oppressive French language laws, which are unparalleled in any other quote-unquote free world country and nation in the world. Another reason why Hazel died at 101 and Bill 101 is that 101 hints at 11, and 11 is the 9/11 number. As I explained before, Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that flew into the Twin Towers looked like a giant 11. This is why there were 81 deaths in Hurricane Hazel, and Hazel McCallion died at 101 years old. So as I explained before, Hazel McCallion, her nickname is Hurricane Hazel, and I explained before how the 81 deaths hinted at 9 times 9, and 9 divided by 11 is 0.818181. So 81 is the 9/11 number. And she also died at the age of 101, which hints at 11, which is a 9/11 number. Also, the 110 stories hints at 11, the Twin Towers. One reason why the name Mississauga is intimidating to pronounce for someone new is that it is 11 letters long. This was designed by God to point to the number 11. Because 11 is God's execution of judgment number, it hints at Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel, which is Toronto, and more connection to Hazel, because Toronto is Mississauga, at 101 years. And 11 is the 9/11 number. New York City is also 11 letters. The reason why God pointed to Mississauga through Obama, Trudeau, the state dinner, is to connect Mississauga, which is 11 letters, to New York City, which is 11 letters. 370 weeks earlier, before the predicted dirty bomb explosion that will lead to the mass evacuation of Manhattan Island, which connects to Montreal Island, the evacuation and exodus from Montreal Island. We have Mississauga, Manhattan, and Montreal Island and Manhattan Island. Oh, okay, so this was a discovery here. this train derailment in East Palestine, it's called a bomb train. It isn't just a term invented after the incident in East Palestine. There were many people that were predicting that there would be these events because of the lack of safety regulation in the railroad industry and the corruption of the railroad companies cutting back and laying people off. And people were warning that there were going to be these events, these derailments of train cars carrying toxic substances in residential neighborhoods, because the trains go through residential neighborhoods, and it was only a matter of time before this would happen. And so they called them bomb trains waiting to happen. And that's what happened. It was an explosion in East Palestine, and it was a bomb train, just like the train that derailed in Mississauga. Same thing, residential neighborhood, a true bomb explosion. It was a 5,000 feet high explosion in Mississauga. And this hints at the dirty bomb. Bomb trains hint at dirty bomb. It's astounding. The bomb trains release the toxic gas and the toxic chemicals, which is what a dirty bomb is. It's a conventional bomb with dirty nuclear material, with radioactive waste that renders the area uninhabitable, which leads to a mass evacuation, just like train derailments, just like bomb trains. It's astounding. God used bomb trains to point to the bomb, the nuclear dirty bomb in Manhattan. All right, 4 times 4 days, which hints at the 44th president, after Hazel McCallion died, Hurricane Hazel, she was honored on February 14th, 2023, as a quote-unquote force of nature at her funeral. The Prime Minister of the 44th Parliament, the 23rd Prime Minister, which is why 4 times 4 days. Okay, the Prime Minister of the 44th Parliament, who during the 44th Parliament enacted the Emergency Act, spoke and called Hazel McCallion a force of nature 4 times 4 days after she died, and her nickname is Hurricane Hazel, because of the hurricane that was a force of nature. And believe me, the Prime Minister didn't know that he was saying that when he said that. He called her a force of nature because she was the mayor, until 2014. She died 9 years later. So she was the mayor up until she was 84 years old. Oh, if I don't mention it later, I might as well mention it now. She would have been the mayor until she was 84, and that's an Obama number, because Obama was born on the date 8/4. That's why God uses the number 84 in his prophetic signs. Also, the symbolic 7 years of the Antichrist's rule, which we are already well inside, by the way, which began in 2017. And the purpose of this prediction is to prove this, if you've raised an eyebrow because you know some things about Bible prophecy. The second coming is in 2024. But 7 years is 84 months. And that's another reason why 84. And the date 8/4 is the 216th day of the calendar year, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which is the number of the Antichrist. So anyway, the 44th the Prime Minister of the 44th Parliament, 4 times 4 days, which hints at 44, called Hurricane Hazel a force of nature. But it was because of her longevity and how she was going strong at the age of 84. And she continued to be a civil servant up until when she died. She was on the board of directors for the biggest airport in Canada, for example. And I forget other things. But anyway, she didn't exactly retire at the age of 84. But when I chuckle, it's not because I'm laughing at Hazel McCallion. It's really because the truth is that this is from God. God designed Hazel McCallion's life for all of this. In Ontario, Hurricane Hazel is honored every February 14th because it is her birthday. Okay, so get this. She died at 101 years old. 4 times 4 days later, She died 4 times 4 days before her 102nd birthday. And Hazel McCallion, which hints at the number 12. 102 hints at the number 12. Take away the 0. That's how God does it. And Hazel McCallion served 12 consecutive terms as mayor. That's also astounding. So the day she was called a force of nature was on her 102nd birthday. I'm sure that's got to be, this is by God. I mean, I don't know, but maybe they said, her birthday's almost coming up. Why don't we have her funeral on that day? I don't know. Or maybe not. Maybe that just happened to be, right? But whatever the case is, it happened on her 102nd birthday, which hints at the number 12, and she served 12 terms. And it was 4 times 4 days after, and she was called a force of nature. And it was, anyway, you got it. It was on her birthday. And also, this also hints at the 11th hour of daylight going into the 12th hour of darkness. Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, and which points to the number 11 in the 9/11 events. Again, we've already established the number 11 with Hazel McCallion because she died at the age of 101, and her association with Bill 101, which led to the exodus to her city from Montreal to Mississauga. And so we have 101, which hints at 11, but we also have her prophetic funeral on her 102nd birthday, which hints at 12, and she served 12 terms, which confirms the fact that 102 hints at 12. And so we have 11 and 12 with Hazel McCallion, which hints at the 11th hour going into the 12th hour. God has demonstrated many 11th hour going into the 12th hour signs. I won't get into them. They're explained in other videos. And the reason, again, for that is because 9/11 was an 11th hour going into the 12th hour sign, as I explained earlier. Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that hit the Twin Towers looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union in a city, New York City, that has 11 letters, etc. And the reason for all that is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness in ancient Israel. And the 9/11 events was a last chance, time is running out. In English, it's an idiom that means last chance, time is running out before judgment, destruction on the nation. So that's why Hazel McCallion 11 and 12 here. On the day of her state funeral that was attended by 3,000 people, I'm forgetting all this stuff. I haven't read it in a while. Wow. So her funeral was attended by 3,000 people, and on 9/11, it was about 3,000, unquote, souls that perished. Okay, the reason why it was, so the official number of deaths on 9/11 was 2,996. 2,996 souls is almost 3,000. And that's because after their rebellion at Mount Sinai, speaking of Egypt, because McCallion is all about Egypt, right? The exodus out of Montreal parallels the exodus from Egypt. And the exodus from Montreal went to Mississauga, and that's why Mississauga became so populated at the beginning, and starting at the beginning of her tenure as mayor, the 7th most populous city. She was called the Queen of Sprawl because her city expanded well after the invention of the automobile. And so there's no real downtown core to Mississauga. It's just big sprawl. It's a huge city. But anyway, getting back to it, she's Hazel McCallion. She's named after the Hurricane Hazel. And there were 81 deaths. And as I explained, that's a 9/11 number. And so she's associated with 9/11 for that reason. But also at her funeral, there were 3,000 people. And on 9/11, it was about 3,000 that died. After their rebellion in judgment, they died at Mount Sinai. Okay, and on the day of her state funeral, February 14th, 2023, and it was a state funeral, by the way. It was that they gave her a funeral as if she was a former important prime minister. But on the day of her state funeral was another dangerous chemical spill incident. This was, so this is amazing. It's more confirmation of Hazel McCallion, Mississauga, the train derailment, okay? Because She's Miss Mississauga, right? She's Mrs. Mississauga, Hazel McCallion. And that's because she began her tenure at the time of the train derailment. She was the heroic mayor that fractured her ankle during the emergency crisis, and she was the one that ordered the evacuation, etc., right? So she's the one, right? And she brings us all the way up to 2023 through her prophetic death, okay? Now, on the day of her state funeral, just so we could confirm it, you would think that God would do a sign on that day. He did. And it was another evacuation sign and another toxic spill sign, coincidentally. On the day of, and so what it was in Arizona, this semi-truck, residents crashed, and residents in the area were told to shelter in place. The incident occurred in the 48th state and closed down the I-10 highway. I-10, God has used before to hint at 110, the 110 stories on 9/11, and Joshua, who died at 110. The book of Joshua, 3 sets of 7, walls of security, collapsing in judgment, right? Joshua died at the 110, which is also 11 symbolism. And McCallion died at the age of 101, which is 11 symbolism. And McCallion is associated with Bill 101 because her city became populated after the exodus from Montreal Island due to the oppressive minority laws in Bill 101. This incident, this one in Arizona now, occurred 11 days after the train derailment in East Palestine. So the toxic spill in Arizona, that was somewhat of an evacuation too, because residents were told to shelter in place. The highway was closed down. It was evacuated. And this was 11 days, and 11 is the number for execution of judgment and Tower of Babel, which is Toronto and everything, right? Genesis 11. This was 11 days after the train derailment in East Palestine. The two of them are separated by 11 days. This incident was in the 48th state and was 4 times 4 days after the death of McCallion. The spill in Arizona was nitric acid. It was in Tucson. Oh, by the way, I used to live in Tucson, and I lived there for a few years. More confirmation that all of this video was designed for me to make. I mean, I know that stretch of the I-10 highway very well. And so that's where it happened. On the day of the death of the funeral of the mayor, that was mayor, when I was in Mississauga during the evacuation, my first memory. And again, if I didn't mention, the 48th president will be Barack Obama, who was the 44th president. This funeral, this incident in the 48th state, the 48th president will be Obama, who was the 44th president. And this incident, this toxic spill in the 48th state, was 4 times on the day of her funeral, was 4 times 4 days after she died. Who was mayor during the emergency evacuation due to a train derailment and toxic gas. All right, to summarize here and to be very clear and to emphasize, Hazel McCallion is about Bill 101. She died at at the age of 101, and this hints at 11. And she died, and as I'm saying, the East Palestine train derailment is a prophetic sign that points to the Mississauga train derailment. And that's why she died, Hazel McCallion, who is all about the number 11 here. She died, or her state funeral, her prophetic state funeral, on the day of this toxic spill, which is prophetic and confirms the prophetic significance of the date of her funeral, because Hazel McCallion is all about the toxic spill with the Mississauga train derailment. And this toxic spill on the day of her funeral was on the I-10 highway. It closed down a section of the I-10 highway, which hints at 110 and therefore the number 11. In other words, God designed this toxic spill on the I-10 highway to hint at Hazel McCallion, who died at the age of 101, which hints at 11. This toxic spill that closed down the I-10 highway on the day of the funeral for the 101-year-old Hazel McCallion was 11 days after the East Palestine train derailment, which is absolutely astounding confirmation that Hazel McCallion is the purpose of the East Palestine train derailment. Or rather, it's all part of a big picture that's also pointing to the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan in the 11th state, where the 110 stories collapsed on 9/11, hence the I-10 highway, and on and on. But you get my point here. It's all a big picture, and this is confirmation that Hazel McCallion and Mississauga and the train derailment are a big part of this because of, ultimately, Bill 101, which is symbolism for the Antichrist laws. And Bill 101 ties into Pierre Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father, the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who enacted the War Measures Act because of these same Quebec separatists, the extremists of that movement, and the terrorism that they were doing. And that obviously ties into his son, the only other prime minister to enact such a law, which is the Emergencies Act, which, as I have explained, is symbolism for what is coming and the Antichrist oppressive minority laws and the mark of the Antichrist. One other connection here that's very plain to see is that God is pointing to domestic terrorism, because Pierre Trudeau enacted the War Measures Act due to the domestic terrorism, which is tied into this big picture, as I've been explaining, through Bill 101 and the Quebec French separatists, which ties into his son, who also enacted such a law in response to the truckers, which I'm sure many in his half of the Civil War considered to be domestic terrorists. But somehow what will happen with the dirty bomb in Manhattan will be converted into the Civil War and the left's war on true conservatives and true Christians, who will be deemed and made to be out to be domestic terrorists, as if that isn't already happening with the things that happened in January of 2000 and you-know-what, for example, at the you-know-what building in the you-know-what Capitol. That's all that is. It's a political witch hunt to persecute and to make the enemy in the eye and through propaganda and fear to be made out to be domestic terrorists. That's, in other words, why Pierre Trudeau gets tied into all of this, including with the Richard Nixon prophecy, which is again what I was explaining earlier, is that the reason why God brought in Pierre Trudeau and Richard Nixon and the prophecy was because Richard Nixon is known for weaponizing the federal government to persecute his political opponents. That's what will be happening here, what is happening currently, right now. Furthermore, it was in the 48th state on the date of her funeral, and it was 4 times 4 days after her death, and Barack Obama is the 44th president, who will be the 48th president. And somehow this predicted dirty bomb explosion, which is what these 2 train derailments are pointing to, these 2 train bombs, bomb trains, somehow the dirty bomb explosion will lead to the rise of the Antichrist. It will be a part of this process that will make Barack Obama president again. Another confirmation connection as well is that the day that Hazel McCallion died, again, is 4 times 4 days, which hints at the 44th president, before the date of her prophetic funeral on the day of this toxic spill in the 48th state, and the 44th president will become the 48th president. But the date of Hazel McCallion's death, as I said earlier, is 1776 hours before the date it is predicted that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, leading to the mass evacuation of Manhattan Island. And 1776 is obviously symbolic of America, but it is also 4 times 444, which hints at the 44th president and American Antichrist. But this 1776 hours is also 74 days. And now that I have explained enough, you perhaps will have the eyes to see, but God has confirmed it through his big picture of signs, that this 74 days hints at 7 plus 4 equals 11. And I just went through all of the profound connections involving the number 11 and Hazel McCallion. For one thing, she died at the age of 101, which hints at 11. And so that's why her death is 74 days, which hints at 11, to the date it is predicted, because she's all about the bomb train, to the date it is, and evacuation of Mississauga, to the date it is predicted of the dirty bomb explosion and the mass evacuation of Manhattan Island on April 13th, 2023. Yet another thing that confirms this and confirms interpreting 74 days in terms of a 7 and a 4, which add up to 11, is that the 7 and a 4 also hint at the date of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, July 4th, 7-4. And so 74 days, which hints at July 4th, is also 1776 hours, which is stunning confirmation designed by God. That this is all what I'm saying is the intention of this. In fact, this is huge. One of the reasons for why the number 1776 is in fact for this prediction. Because this predicted event, the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan, will be the seminal event that symbolizes the walls of security collapsing in judgment on America, as promised and warned with the 9/11 judgment warning events in Manhattan. And 1776 and July 4th symbolize the founding of America, which was by God, God's hand on American history, and the relationship that America has had with God, God's Gentile nation, the only other nation in history other than Israel that was founded on a relationship with God. Some Canadians that will think of themselves as distinct and different than Americans, and in many cases morally superior to Americans, but this is their bigotry rooted in secularism and materialism, leftism. But make no mistake, Canada is also part of this founding of America. When the Pilgrims came over, they didn't divide into America and Canada. It was only with the Revolutionary War that there became such a distinction. And this is why this sign involving Canada, Hazel McCallion, it's part of the same thing, God's hand on North American history. I will also add that the reason why the left hates America is truthfully rooted in spiritual hate for God. That's the truth behind all of this. On the same day as the funeral of Hurricane Hazel and the toxic gas incident on the Highway I-10 in the 48th state, in Tucson, where I lived for about 4 years, making this another confirmation that my life was set up for this, an exhibit of the Obama presidency opened. Steve Fletcher discovered some astounding numbers that confirm this is an important sign. I assume that its importance is tied to the McCallion funeral and the incident in the 48th state. In other words, the purpose of this Obama exhibit sign is to confirm the significance of Obama in these events on February 14th that are pointing to the dirty bomb in and evacuation of Manhattan. All right, this Hofstra University's 13th presidential conference on the administration of Barack Obama includes an exhibition at the Hofstra University Museum of Art featuring photographs, facsimile documents, editorial cartoons, and objects on loan from the Barack Obama Presidential Library, National Archives, and Records Administration. It opened on this February 14th date. So this ties Obama to it. Remember, Obama said he had been to Mississauga 3 times. This is the day of the funeral of the mayor from Mississauga. It's this 13th presidential conference, and that's relevant too because the number 13 is symbolism for the Antichrist. Again, Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist at the Tower of Babel, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the month. And the 2 Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. And so there you go. This toxic spill in the 48th state, 4 times 4 days after the death of Hurricane Hazel, the mayor of Mississauga, and 11 days after the train derailment in East Palestine. Thank you to Steve Fletcher for pointing this prophetic sign out. Okay, continuing what I wrote before, I didn't make it clear. 2/14, February 14th, is Hazel McCallion Day in Ontario. Her funeral happened to be on Hazel McCallion Day. A film was released last year named White Noise. It takes place in Ohio in the early 1980s, and the plot is a train derailment and evacuation of a small town in Ohio. This isn't a coincidence. The reason this film takes place in the early 1980s is because it hints at the train derailment in 1979 in Mississauga. Period. This coincidence is not due to some mysterious Luciferian CIA agents, etc. There is an enormous movement on social media to attribute things like this to a supposed Luciferian conspiracy, but I will refrain from critiquing this and the root of this incorrect worldview. I did a little bit at the beginning of this video. Not only this though, but some of the extras, some of the cast, the extras in the movie are from East Palestine. So again, this film was released named White Noise, and it takes place in Ohio right near East Palestine in the early 1980s. And some of the extras in the movie are from East Palestine. And the movie is about, the movie is about a train derailment and evacuation. And 1979 is essentially the early 80s. And that's the train derailment in Mississauga that this is pointing to, as I've been explaining. So the prophetic numbers that confirm this. First of all, what I didn't know at the time that I wrote this email, which I just learned, is that God uses official trailer release dates in his big picture of signs for prophetic movies that he's using to develop his big picture. The official release date of this trailer for this movie, White Noise, was for Netflix, was November 22nd, 2022. And this is 84 days before the prophetic funeral of Hazel McCallion. And that was the same day as the toxic spill on the I-10 highway in the 48th state, which we were just talking about. Now, 84 days is, again, I think I explained earlier, a number that identifies Barack Obama. Also, as I mentioned, 84 months is 7 years, and that in Bible prophecy is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist's rule. But 84 days is 12 weeks. And the reason why that's confirmation is because, again, the prophetic funeral was on Hazel McCallion's 102nd birthday by coincidence, and 102 hints at 12. And she served for 12 terms, which is why she had a state funeral. She had been the mayor forever. 12 terms, 36 years. And so that's why 12 is confirmation. We have this prophetic 12 weeks, 84 days connection between the official release date of the White Noise trailer to the date of the funeral and the toxic spill in Arizona. Also, 12 weeks is 2,016 hours, and 2,016 hours hints at 216. And Barack Obama, who was born on the date 8/4, date 8/4 is the 216th day in the calendar year, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which is the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, and the Antichrist will be the 48th president, which is why this toxic spill in the 48th state, 2,016 hours after the official release date of this trailer for the movie White Noise. One of the days of filming came after the rest of the filming, and that was on November 4th, 2021. If you will recall, I was talking about the date 11/4 earlier. This was the day that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, exactly 7 years after the date 11/4 in 2008, when Obama was elected. But 11/4 in 2021 was also extremely prophetic and was predicted ahead of time to be so. An extremely prophetic day of signs was 11/4 2021. This is another one added to them on this date. The other signs on 11/4 2024 confirm this sign on 11/4 2021. They filmed on the Hope Memorial Bridge in Cleveland, the only day of filming in Cleveland. Cleveland reveals Obama. God uses the city of Cleveland to point to Obama. Briefly, President Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms. Just like Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms, he will skip the 45th presidency. Cleveland skipped the 23rd presidency. The 23rd presidency is 23 is the ninth prime number. 45 is the ninth triangular number. The number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. The 23rd presidency was the presidency of Benjamin Harrison, which hints at Kamala Harris, who, when after she dies in a plane crash, will lead to Barack Obama as her replacement and become the president again and the Antichrist. President Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd president and that's why Barack Obama wore jersey number 23, the basketball president, when he played basketball in high school. All right, that's just scratching the surface though, because there's also the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who played for Cleveland and wore jersey number 23, and on and on. Okay. The date 11/4, as I said earlier, hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, equals the 44th president and Obama. Christ is the bridge of hope between man and God. This was 1,260 hours. Again, when the number 1,260 occurs 7 times in Bible prophecy and is related to the period of the Antichrist. This filming in Cleveland was 1,260 hours before the predicted dirty bomb explosion and evacuation in Manhattan. Again, this movie, White Noise, is about a bomb train, a train derailment and toxic gas, and about an evacuation, an explosion and an evacuation, which hints at the dirty bomb explosion and evacuation of Manhattan Island. 1,260 hours is 75 weeks, which is also 17 months and 9 days, a pairing of 17 and 9 that points to Obama, who was president from 2009 until 2017, as I mentioned earlier. And this is a second witness that confirms the signs and connections. This filming of the movie White Noise on the Bridge of Hope in Cleveland was exactly 42 years, and 1,260 days is 42 months. Again, this period is the period of the end times, symbolically, and the Antichrist. So this filming was exactly 42 years after the Iranian hostage crisis, which is also known as the 444-day hostage crisis, because it lasted exactly 444 days, because the Antichrist is the 44th president. That's why the 42-month or years connection from the hostage crisis. And the 444-day hostage crisis began on the date 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44. The Iranian hostage crisis, or the 444-day hostage crisis, began exactly 220 months. And again, 220 is symbolizes rock, which symbolizes Jesus, and also 2 times 110 stories on 9/11. The beginning of the 444-day hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis, an enemy of America, which is symbolic of judgment on America, was exactly 220 months after the Russian submarine K-19 nuclear incident. There was a movie made about this incident starring Harrison Ford and Liam Neeson. The K-19 ended up receiving the nickname Hiroshima. This incident occurred on July 4th, 1961, America's birthday, 1 month before the Antichrist's birthday, when he was born in 1961, 31 days afterward. And the Antichrist is described in the book of Isaiah chapter 31. And that incident was in turn exactly 2,220 months after July 4th in 1776. And 1776 is 4 times 444. Through the 9/11 events, God pointed to Washington, George Washington, as I explained earlier, who was born on the date 2/22, which is why this connects to the dirty bomb in Manhattan, because God pointed to the 9/11 events in order to point to George Washington, who marched down Wall Street and consecrated the nation to God inside Trinity Chapel, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which is what a nuclear or a dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan will be, a loss of divine protection from God. And so let's just summarize that again. From the founding of the country, which involves George Washington, it is exactly 2,220 months, which hints at George Washington, to the date of the K-19 nuclear incident, the submarine nuclear accident, which was a big deal. And the submarine was attempted to be rescued by Americans, but they refused. America was involved at the time in the incident. And Russia is a symbolic enemy, and that's what the losing of the protection, the blessings of America is. The symbolic enemies attack America, just like in ancient Israel, when Israel was warned in Isaiah 9:11, which was the daily reading on the date 9/11 in 2001. And so anyway, from the Russian nuclear accident, which is hinting at the nuclear material and the dirty bomb, it is exactly 220 months to the Iranian hostage, the 444-day hostage crisis, which is in turn exactly 42 years, which hints at 1,260 days, to the filming on the Hope Bridge in Cleveland and the other prophetic signs on that day, which are very important, which I won't get into. And in turn, that day is 1,260 hours to the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan. So that's an amazing connection from the founding of America to the date of the dirty bomb explosion. I could make a separate video and title it something, like the founding of America prophecy or something. Residents of East Palestine were extras in the movie White Noise, which was filmed nearby. The release date of the movie on November 25th, 2022 is 200,160 minutes to the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan, which hints at 216, which is 6 times 6 times 6. 200,160 minutes is also 3,336 hours, which in my opinion hints at G336, the 336th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance, which is the word for to be put to death, murder, in the dirty bomb event, in other words. White Noise, the release of it, on November 25th, 2022, was also exactly 70 days before the train derailment in East Palestine, which is why the current governor, Mike DeWine, is the 70th governor of Ohio. DeWine was also the 50th Attorney General of Ohio. 70 plus 50 equals 120, equals Noah's flood. God gave Noah the number 120 regarding the evacuation and judgment on the land with the timing of the flood. Mike DeWine, was also a U.S. representative from the 7th District of the 17th state, Ohio. The flood began in Genesis 7:17 and ended on the 17th day of the 7th month. The ark was raised up high above the earth in Genesis 7:17, and the flood ended In other words, the evacuation, and the flood ended on the 17th day of the 7th month. And 17 is the 7th prime number. So that's why Mike DeWine, another confirmation of the prophetic significance of Mike DeWine, was the representative from the 7th district in the 17th state. Those numbers go together. He was also the 70th governor of Ohio, and the 70th week in this most central prophecy in the Bible, which symbolizes the period of the Antichrist's rule, will involve the Antichrist in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, for which East Palestine hints at. Also, the Temple Mount is in East Jerusalem, the old city, which is why the train derailment in East Palestine was 70 days after the release of this movie, White Noise. That, obviously, we now know is a prophetic sign from God and is not a Luciferian conspiracy. 70 and 50, again, Mike DeWine was the 70th governor and the 50th attorney general, are both numbers that symbolize the restoration of Israel. And this incident was in East Palestine. It was an evacuation of East Palestine, which, as explained, points to the exodus of Montreal Island, which parallels the exodus in the Bible. In Exodus 3:14, God told Moses to tell the people that his name is I Am. The symbol for I Am in Hebrew is the exact same symbol for the symbol pi. And pi is 3:14. And so God said his name is I Am in Exodus 3:14, and the symbol is the same symbol for pi, which is 3:14. Which is why the train derailment in East Palestine was 70 days after the release of White Noise, and the train derailment in East Palestine is 3 months and 14 days before it is predicted that Israel will bomb Iran's nuclear facilities on May 17th, 2023. That's another prediction. There's more to Mike DeWine, which I think I explain in a minute. But one thing that I recall that I don't know if I included in the emails that I wrote over a month ago is that DeWine seems to also hint at divine. That would be the name, the reason for the surname DeWine. It's hinting at divine, which is further confirmation that these numbers surrounding Mike DeWine are prophetic. They're divine. And also divine, this governor DeWine, he was quite involved with the East Palestine story, right? He was there, for example, drinking the water in front of the residents, saying to prove that it was safe. And he was the one that said, I don't recommend drinking the water before that. And he was the one, I think he said, I wouldn't return now, but then he told them to return and all that, right? He's very much a part of the story of East Palestine. And he has these prophetic numbers involved with him and his history. In his history with Washington, D.C., for that matter, right? Because this East Palestine incident isn't just, a judgment for Ohio. It's a national judgment, prophetic sign about America's walls of security collapsing and the dirty bomb in Manhattan, etc., and the rise of the Antichrist in Washington, D.C., for that matter. Okay, here is the video from the Obama-Trudeau-Nixon prophecy state dinner. So I'll just play the clip where he says what he says.
Before I ever became president, when we celebrated my sister and Conrad's marriage, Michelle and I took our daughters to Canada. And we went to Burlington, and this is always tough. Mississauga. And then we went to Toronto and Niagara Falls. Mississauga. I can do that.
Obama was in Burlington and Mississauga, and then Toronto and Niagara Falls in 2003. 2003 hints at 23. And Obama was the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. The East Palestine train derailment hints at the train derailment in Mississauga, and it occurred on the date 2-3 in 2023. The date 2-3, February 3rd in 2023, the East Palestine train derailment, hints at 23, and as does the year 2023. And this hints back to Obama and his remark regarding Mississauga in 2003, which also hints at 23. In other words, the date of the East Palestine train derailment on 2-3 is confirmation that it points to Mississauga and Obama, who ate at the Summit Garden Restaurant in Mississauga in 2003. And a reminder, the Summit hints at the high place, which is the Hebrew word Bama. The basketball president wore jersey 23 in high school in Hawaii. He was in Mississauga in 2003 visiting his sister because he couldn't make her wedding in Hawaii when he was campaigning for the U.S. Senate. In other words, this was right before he rose to national power and fame. 2003 and the date 2-3 hint at 2 divided by 3 equals 0.666, the number of the Antichrist. The state dinner in which he mentioned his visit to Mississauga in 2003 was with the 23rd Prime Minister, right after his election on 11/4, which hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, exactly 7 years after the election of the 44th president on the date 11/4. The 23rd Prime Minister would go on to mirror his father with the Emergency Act during the 44th Parliament. Obama, the basketball president who wore jersey 23, was the 44th president. Okay, further reading what I wrote to friends in the email thread. If you recall, I had wondered if there might be a prophetic sign on January 26th, as it hints at 1260. The date 126 hints at 1260. Sure enough, there was a sign. There are 2 local media outlets that broadcasted a story, an advertorial, regarding a pilot program for My ID in East Palestine. I'll just play a clip here of one of these advertorials.
Palestine is known as the place to be. It's way ahead of the curve on a program to provide better treatment for anyone in the event of an emergency. I learned how it works and how it could help everyone in East Palestine.
My ID provides quick medical information for emergency responders. Darlene Chapman is the outreach coordinator for this project, and she's an EMT.
If they're in a situation where they can't tell us or they don't have any family around, this is something that would make my life easier.
My ID works by taking a camera phone and pointing it at a QR code. It provides valuable medical information such as allergies, breathing difficulties, or other conditions, so you get proper treatment and care.
If anybody sees the QR code, you'll be able to scan this and get the information. So it helps that person, not necessarily just here, but anywhere in the nation.
There are a few options for My ID: a bracelet, key fob, necklace, or attachment on your watch band. You can choose the one which fits your lifestyle best. That's up to you. Orders will start in January. The fire department has already collected $5,000 in donations to help.
That's our ultimate goal. We want to be able to give this for free to the citizens and provide them with that extra layer of care so that we can better treat them.
The offer includes Unity Township, which is served by the East Palestine Fire Department. These items cost around $20 each. You can even buy it for yourself. The fire department is hoping you'll be willing to wear it.
My goal is to have 100% of our residents and the citizens we serve in the township to have one of these and be working with them to make sure that we can treat them better and provide the best service that we can.
There's a 3-year plan to get My ID going across the village and make it available to all 4,700 residents.
Perhaps you noticed there was a repeated emphasis on all of the residents, every one of them getting one of these My ID things. Obviously, this sort of thing would only be useful theoretically for those that have a health condition or the elderly, and obviously all residents don't need one of these. And this isn't an accident. Whether they know it or not, they are perhaps unconsciously working for Satan. And this is because, as I will explain, This is related to the mark of the Antichrist. My ID is a wearable RFID and QR code that connects to a person's complete medical records and history. The My ID bracelets or necklaces, etc., were free for the first 250 customers. They are $20 each. 250 and 20 hints at 2,520, God's end times number in Bible prophecy, which is astounding because it confirms the 1,260 hinted at with the date 126. 2,520 is 2 times 1,260. And both of these numbers symbolize the end times period in Bible prophecy. So if you got that, the date hits at 1,260 and the wearable bracelet itself hints at 2,520. And these are the two numbers that symbolize the end times. The first day to receive the free wearable My ID and to sign up was on January 29th. This was the date that Hurricane Hazel McCallion, the mayor of Mississauga, died. So we have another connection between East Palestine and Mississauga and the train derailment. And again, the day that Hazel McCallion died is 74 days, which hints at July 4th, which is also 1776 hours before the date it is predicted that the dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, leading to the mass evacuation of Manhattan Island. And therefore, this My ID bracelet program thing is also connected to the dirty bomb explosion in Manhattan. And again, as you will recall, the death of Hazel McCallion is 4 times 4 days, which hints at the 44th president before the date of her prophetic funeral and the toxic spill on the I-10 highway in the 48th state and evacuation from the highway. And therefore, this My ID program, prophetic sign in East Palestine, is also connected to this sign that points to the 44th president becoming the 48th president. There is an extreme coincidence in this article that I linked to in this email. In the article, there is a tweet regarding this My ID wearable story about East Palestine. If you look carefully, the tweet of the Amazon seller's listing for the My ID bracelet can be picked up for free at the Heartland Supercenter in Mississauga. What is going on here, I ask? What is going on here is that God is confirming for me that this is all from him and it's all designed, because there's no way. So we have this story that comes out on January 26th, and the date to pick it up, it's about the My ID bracelet, and the day the first day you can receive it for free, the initiation of the pilot program is on the 29th of January, the day that Hurricane Hazel McCallion, of the mayor of Mississauga, died. And there is this article that came out by visiontimes.com, an English international news website, but it's talking about the coincidence of the My ID bracelet program in East Palestine being introduced just shortly days before the East Palestine train derailment. And this article has in it a link to the Amazon seller for the My ID bracelet, who says you can pick it up for free at the Heartland Supercenter in Mississauga. This is Ontario, Canada. What is this? That's what a coincidence that this is what this is doing in this article, in this My ID advertorial for East Palestine and the promotion of this pilot program for East Palestine. It's absolutely astounding. Furthermore, if you caught that, you will have noticed how I emphasized Heartland, and you will have noticed the name Heartland if you're really getting what's going on here. Because, well, we're talking about the thing, right, that is giving people heart attacks and myocarditis, etc., and clogging people's arteries, etc., which is what I talked about earlier. And so that's why, and we talked about how people will not be able to buy or sell food unless they have taken the thing. And that will have to be enforced somehow digitally, which is what this My ID bracelet hints at, symbolizes. In fact, it is my opinion that it will be the My ID bracelet. That's what God was doing here. Okay, there's more. Okay, let me just continue to tie this all together. In other words, what I'm saying is that through the East Palestine train derailment, the bigger picture here, as I was saying earlier, it's about Bill 101 and the mark of the Antichrist, the oppressive laws. And God pointed to this pilot program for the My ID bracelet through the train derailment in East Palestine. Because first of all, what a coincidence. Like, it's just a matter of days afterward that the pilot program and the day that she died and the train derailment was right after the pilot program began. Okay, so let's continue. You will recall I was led to spend all of last Saturday and Sunday investigating prophetic signs and the history surrounding the Mississauga train derailment and evacuation, the biggest in North American history, one of my first memories from when I was 5 years old, which tied to the exodus of Montreal to Mississauga. It was after this research last weekend, late on Sunday night, that I first learned about the East Palestine train derailment. This is the coincidence of coincidences. And then it was learned that the East Palestine train derailment points to the Mississauga train derailment, and that both are pointing to the dirty bomb evacuation of Manhattan Island on March 13th, 2023. What I am saying is that it is a supernaturally designed coincidence that a My ID wearable located in Mississauga is found in this article about My ID wearables in East Palestine and the East Palestine train derailment. What does this mean? My ID is obviously symbolism for the mark of the beast. It may even be the actual method of enforcement for the mark of the beast. It would make sense that the elderly or poor without smartphones or anyone will be allowed to use My ID as a means to prove the person is up to date on their things. It seems likely to me that tattoos, embedded microchips, luciferase scanners, etc. are not necessary. That I believe those unnecessary technologies are could be likely designed by Satan to throw people off. People that are looking for ways to justify in their minds why the thing in its current form isn't the mark of the Antichrist, which it is, and it does not require some sort of additional technology to go with it to make it the mark of the Antichrist. But anyway, it could very well be that God has gone through great lengths with all that has been explained in this email thread and the train derailment in East Palestine to demonstrate that this My ID is the digital verification aspect of the mark of the beast. It may not be simply symbolism. After all, whatever is about to happen will happen extremely rapidly. The second coming of Jesus is in October of 2024, for example. My ID wearables could be implemented overnight. Tattoos, etc., probably not. Therefore, God turned the train over in East Palestine to point to this pilot program for My ID. This would be why Hurricane Hazel McCallion died on the same day as the My ID start date. Again, those in social media that don't know what to think about these types of coincidences because they don't understand what God is doing, his prophetic signs, nor his plan, will be saying that, like the white noise movie coincidence, Luciferian CIA agents are behind the My ID coincidence. This is incorrect. It is God that is behind this. The entire email thread is probably worth rereading. It is very important. If My ID is the vehicle for enforcement of the VACCINE passport, it would once again fool Christians that don't have the spiritual eyes to see what is going on and are still waiting for a physical mark on people's foreheads. In other words, it would seem to be perfect for deception if this were the goal. I'm thinking that it makes sense. People are expecting, many Christians are expecting some sort of high tech for it to be the mark of the Antichrist. It already is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It's not about the enforcement mechanism anyway, but the My ID is high tech enough. Get your bracelet so that you can prove you've taken the mark. And regarding the Emergency Act and the bank account symbolism, somehow the digital mechanism, the My ID will somehow be connected to one's bank account. That's what will obviously happen. Continuing on with what I wrote, this is the right track. The train derailment is more than about pointing to the dirty bomb in Manhattan. It is also about Obama and the mark of the Antichrist. It was explained earlier how the Mississauga train derailment and evacuation connected to the predicted date of the dirty bomb and evacuation of Manhattan Island on April 13, 2023. This is through April 13th being 12,600 hours, which hints at 1,260, 42 months in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist, after the white noise filming in Cleveland on 11/4/2021. I mentioned that 11/4/2021 is supremely important for signs, but didn't mention the signs on that date. It would take a half hour of typing, but the videos have repeatedly explained how 11/4/2021 is about the VACCINE. For example, it was the day that Biden announced the details of his VACCINE mandate for 84 million workers. This was the 13th anniversary of Obama's election in 11/4/2008, and 11/4 hints at 11 times 4 equals 44, and it was the 99th anniversary of the discovery of King Tut's tomb, Pharaoh, the Antichrist, symbolism, and was 9 months and 13 days after the home run king, player 44, Hank Aaron, died after taking the thing. He died and he's player 44, he died exactly 444 weeks after the Dark Knight Rises massacre, which in turn was exactly 42 months, Bible prophecy, Antichrist, after Obama's inauguration, The Dark Knight Rose, on January 20th, 2008. And his inauguration was exactly 1,260 years, which is again hinting at the 42 months and 1,260 days in Bible prophecy about the Antichrist. His inauguration was exactly 1,260 years after the biggest earthquake in Israel history, and on and on. Tens of thousands of people died. The movie White Noise and Biden's mandate on 11/4/2021. The filming, remember, it was filmed on that day, and a mandate on that day. So let me repeat that. It was the 99th anniversary of King Tut's tomb discovery and the 13th anniversary of Obama, and 9 months and 13 days after the home run king, as in the Antichrist King 44, died from taking the thing, and he died 6 + 6 + 6 days after taking the thing, but he also died exactly 444 weeks after the massacre, the Dark Knight Rises massacre, which hints at the massacre from taking the thing, which was exactly 42 months after the Dark Knight rose on the inauguration day, which was again exactly 1,260 years after the biggest earthquake in Israel's history. It's astounding beyond words. All right, if you caught that, I'll just repeat it again. This is a major coincidence that can't be a coincidence, and therefore it's a second witness that confirms that this is what is actually being demonstrated by God through his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. This date, 11/4 in 2021, was the day of the details of the mandate for the thing. And it was exactly 13 years after Obama was first elected. And it was exactly 99 years after the discovery of King Tut's tomb in the Valley of Kings in Egypt. And in the Bible, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, is a type, a foreshadow for the Antichrist, Barack Obama. So we have this 99 years and 13 years connection. 9 and 13. God pairs the numbers 9 and 13 together to confirm the signs and connections. Also, this date 11/4, which is all about the details of the thing mandate, was exactly 9 months and 13 days after the most famous death due to the thing, the home run king, Hank Aaron. And he died 6 + 6 + 6 days after he took the thing, which was on the very first day of the 117th Congress. And 9 times 13 equals 117. And this is the point. But it has now been learned why, or a major reason why God points to the number 117. It is because of what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. calls the most important speech in American history. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a somewhat, if you will, like a prophet for God. He is God's voice, which is incidentally why he has an issue with his voice physically. It's symbolic of this. And the speech that he's talking about was the President Eisenhower's farewell speech that was delivered on the date 117, which hints at 117, on January 17th, 1961. This was exactly 30 years after the birth of James Earl Jones, another man God is using in his prophetic signs. James Earl Jones is king symbolism. He played King Jafar in the movie Coming to America. He was the voice of Mufasa, the Lion King, the voice of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist king symbolism. And James Earl Jones read the audio King James Bible. And in the Bible, 30 years is symbolic of a king. David and Joseph were made kings at the age of 30 years old, which is why exactly 30 years from the birth of James Earl Jones is very significant. That 30th anniversary of James Earl Jones is the day that Dwight Eisenhower delivered the most important speech in American history. Dwight Eisenhower was the only military general, that was also a president in the 20th century. And this speech is known for how Dwight Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex. And he also warned of elites and the capturing of science and the science industry and a form of government called technocracy. He warned of the military-industrial complex and technocracy. And this is exactly what we are going through right now. It's a coup d'etat, a war on democracy from the military-industrial complex and the technocrats and their followers in the political cult. So anyway, there's much more to be said about that, but also Barack Obama was born 199 days after this speech, and 199 hints at 19 and 9. And the number 9 is the most important number as it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 19 also symbolizes God's judgment. It is 9 + 10, and the number 10 is symbolism for God's perfect order, and so 9 and 10 hints at God's perfect judgment. That's why Barack Obama, the Antichrist that will be propped up and be the leader of this coup on democracy, was born 199 days after Dwight Eisenhower's speech. Dwight Eisenhower was the 34th president. Barack Obama first entered politics at the age of 34 years old. And he lived, the 44th president lived for 4 years, or grew up for 4 years in the country of Indonesia, which is made up of 34 provinces. And that's symbolic because like how America is made up of 50 states, it's symbolic of the country. And while Barack Obama was president, there was the Washington, D.C. earthquake, which caused $34 million in damages to the National Cathedral otherwise known as America's spiritual home. And so anyway, that's why, because it's pointing to Dwight Eisenhower, the 34th president, and his speech. Now, there's much more to be said about this. Dwight Eisenhower gave this speech shortly after the closest and most controversial election in the 20th century between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. And that election came down to 119,000 votes. And that number, 119, is symbolism or hints at 9/11. And the Republicans after this election cried foul. And you can see the parallel, obviously, with our modern time. And that modern time example is a result of the military-industrial complex that orchestrated the events that allowed the shenanigans, which will ultimately allow Barack Obama to become president again. But that election came down to 119,000 votes, and 11,009 days after that was the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated by the military-industrial complex. Now, 1,109 days not only hints at 119,000 votes on the day that he was elected, John F. Kennedy, but God uses this number, 1,109, to hint at and pair 110 and 9 together because of the events of 9/11, which I explained in other videos, but the 110 stories collapsed, engendered a small earthquake, and cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which symbolized the cracked foundation of America, which is God. And that's where George Washington was inaugurated, and he walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel to consecrate the nation to God, saying that if the nation were ever to turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. Well, Wall Street, this march down Wall Street, was named after the 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. And Joshua, who died at the age of 110, as in 110 stories, and led the Hebrews around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment, and the 110 stories of the Twin Towers collapsed in God's judgment. And so that's the connection between Wall Street and the collapse of the 110-story towers that cracked the foundation with an earthquake of Federal Hall on Wall Street. Anyway, that's why God pairs 9 and 110 together. And 20 years later, on the anniversary, 20 years is symbolic of a perfect period of waiting in the Bible. This is symbolic of God's period of waiting for America to repent after the 9/11 judgment warning. And on that anniversary was the sudden collapse of the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. And the iconic image of that is the cargo plane with the Afghanis running after it, leaving the airport in Kabul. And the image of that, if you see on the side of it, is a big serial number. It is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. And so anyway, John F. Kennedy was assassinated 1,109 days after the 119,000 vote controversial election, which is proof that the military-industrial complex assassinated John F. Kennedy, probably because they got him elected, but then didn't approve of what he was doing because John F. Kennedy was trying to fight corruption and the military-industrial complex. And so was his brother afterwards, who was also assassinated. And so anyway, there you have it there. And Barack Obama was born exactly 120 weeks before John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And there's more prophetic significance to that, but 120 is a number that symbolizes God's judgment. God gave Noah the number 120 and a period of time involving 120 years until the judgment destruction. I explained earlier how the filming of white noise, which ties to the East Palestine train derailment, obviously, and the other signs I just mentioned regarding the thing on the same date, 11/4/2021, including the mandate on that day. 84 million workers, which hints at Obama, who was born on the date 8/4, right? And I predicted that ahead in advance because it was 84 days after the prophetic sign, the Field of Dreams baseball game, but that's another story, but that also ties to Obama. But anyway, exactly 42 years back, if you recall, was the first day of the 444-day hostage crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis. But that day was exactly 188 weeks after Gerald Ford, the only president never to have been elected vice president or president, just like Barack Obama, Ford was appointed instead, just like Barack Obama will be appointed, and this is how he will overcome the restriction in the 22nd Amendment on someone from being elected to the office more than twice. He will be appointed instead. This Iranian hostage crisis was exactly 188 weeks, and again, 188 hints at the word woe in the Old Testament, in the Old Testament, exclamation mark, used in context of extreme judgment from God. The Iranian hostage crisis, which was extreme judgment from God, the 444-day hostage crisis, was exactly 188 weeks after Gerald Ford, which hints at Obama because he was unelected, announced his thing, VACCINE, program protecting every citizen in America, and that was on March 24th, 1976. And it connects profoundly to East Palestine and, as I just explained, the My ID bracelet and Bill 101 and the Emergency Act, which was, as I have been explaining, all about the mark of the Antichrist laws, which will be about, of course, the thing. And so Gerald Ford's announcement, it connects to the thing. So 1976 was like 2020. There was the big scare over a virus, and Ford was compelled to make an announcement in his re-election year, to make an announcement that his plan, just like Biden's plan, the mandate, right? Ford had a national plan too. And Ford's national plan connects with 188 weeks and 42 years exactly to Biden's mandate. It's absolutely astounding, okay? Now, the date that he did that, which was March 24th, 1976, and by the way, just like COVID, the thing had to be, but they had more sense back then. They weren't in a mass formation. The thing had to be recalled because people were getting side effects, injuries. People were getting injured, and so the whole thing was scrapped. But, it was just a scare anyway. There was no virus that was going to kill many thousands of people. And by the way, there is no such thing that could do that. The Spanish flu was not an influenza virus. It was not. It was a bacterial pneumonia, and that's a fact. And the one paper that the NIH has that says they supposedly discovered in an autopsy of someone that was buried in frozen tundra in Scandinavia, I think, that they've isolated the thing from Spanish flu in 1918. That paper is authored by Anthony Fauci, the biggest corrupt liar of history, whose name Fauci is in Italian means sickle, as in Revelation chapter 14, the angels sickle the harvest of the grapes that go into the winepress of God's wrath. That kind of sickle. Okay, anyway, the prediction being made in this video proves this. That's the purpose of this prediction, is to prove the controversial things that I'm explaining. That's why God has given me a voice through this prediction. The truth about Spanish flu is that it isn't a contagious influenza type virus. It's a bacteria pneumonia. Okay? There is no such virus that could cause what is claimed to have caused millions of deaths in 1918. It's not possible for such a thing to happen. And people know that. But that's why they needed to make the false paper about the supposed isolation of the virus from the frozen corpse in Scandinavia, because they needed to perpetuate their VACCINE industry. It's all corruption, okay? And that's proven with this prediction. That's the purpose of this prediction. Make no mistake. Now back to what I was saying. Yeah, the whole thing had to be scrapped. Massive numbers of people were getting side effects. And anyway, this whole thing connects extremely profoundly to East Palestine and the My ID bracelet and Obama and the death of Hank Aaron, the home run king, player number 44. Okay? And Hank Aaron, player number 44, died 444 weeks after the Batman massacre. And Hank Aaron, in 4 years of his career, hit a total of 44 home runs. And he beat Babe Ruth's home run record by hitting a pitch off of pitcher number 44 in the 4th inning. And he tied Babe Ruth's record on the date 4-4. Okay. So, back to what I was saying here, what I wrote to in the email thread here. Ford announced his Thing program exactly 120 weeks after he became the 40th vice president. The 40 days of increasing floodwaters began 120 years after God told Noah he would destroy mankind. God gave Noah 120 years to the flood, and then the flood began with 40 days of increasing floodwaters. And the flood is just judgment symbolism, the destruction of God's people. Why? Because their genetics had been corrupted, as it says in the account, which is what the thing does. It's designed to corrupt one's genetics, right? That's what that technology is. And that's why God is destroying mankind now. Understand? Follow? It's the end, just like the flood event end. And that's why Gerald Ford announced his thing exactly 120 weeks after he became the 40th vice president. So, Ford ascended to the White House during Watergate. The name Watergate hints at Noah's flood and the waters that burst forth. Watergate was about Nixon illegally weaponizing the federal government to persecute his political opponents, which is exactly what is happening now and will accelerate when the unelected Antichrist, just like Ford, retakes the White House in the left's civil war against their arch enemy, conservative Christians. And so it is now finally known the significance of Watergate in God's big picture of signs. Amazing. There's actually more to Watergate, which I'll explain in another video. Much more. And all of the information in this email thread will be proven to be true on April 13th when the prediction comes to pass. And by the way, Watergate hints at the flood, because the flood waters burst forth after the gates of the deep burst forth, and the gates flooded. First of all, judgment begins at the gates, symbolically in the Bible, okay? But the Watergate is hinting at the flood waters that burst forth from the deep when the floodgates opened, okay? That's what Watergate hints at. And that's why Ford was the 40th vice president exactly 120 weeks before his prophetic thing program for every citizen to be getting the thing. And again, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this connection. It's to prove the connection between Gerald Ford and his thing mandate and how it is all a parallel with what we are going through right now, including Watergate and the weaponization of the federal government, etc. And the mark of the to prove everything that I'm saying. That's why God has given me a voice through this prediction. If you miss that, you miss entirely the point of this video and this prediction that is from God. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. The disaster in East Palestine occurred just before 9 a.m. on the date 2-3 in 2023, which is an astounding pairing of 9 and 23. God frequently pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. Furthermore, God pairs 9 and 23 together to reveal the identity of the mark of the Antichrist, because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, and this mark of the Antichrist affects one's 23 chromosomes. And so that's why 9 and 23 also. Also, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey 23, but when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, he wore jersey number 9, and that team scored an average of 44 points beats their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president that was president in 2009 and wore jersey number 23, and on and on. The basketball president and GOAT Antichrist, who is from Chicago, hence the GOAT of basketball, who played for the Chicago Bulls. It was 11 rail cars carrying hazardous material that derailed. This is a pairing of 9 and 11 that hints at 9/11. And again, God confirms his signs and connections through second witnesses. It says in the Bible that a second and third witness is required to confirm a matter, and this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses that to confirm a matter, which is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And the simplest way of providing second witnesses is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23 and 9 and 11. And so the disaster occurred just before 9, and it was 11 rail cars that were carrying hazardous material that derailed. The wastewater that was used to put out the fire was and is being transported to a waste management facility in Harris County, Texas, which is Houston, the fourth biggest city in the U.S. God frequently uses prophetic signs in Harris County to point to Kamala Harris, the vehicle through which the Antichrist will rise to power after she dies in a plane crash. This is why this connection between East Palestine and Harris County. Okay, I wrote in the email thread, I woke up last night with the word thundersnow repeated in my mind as a song. It was known that the date 1-3, January 3rd, in 2022, when Biden was trapped in his Air Force plane for 30 minutes due to the sneak attack, the quote-unquote sneak attack storm on Washington, D.C., that had what was said to be thunder snow, hinted at the number 13. The date 1-3 hints at 13. 13, as I said, is the symbolic number for the Antichrist. Confirmation of this was the King of the North, Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback sign on this date, which is explained in the must-watch Jeopardy prophecy video. But why this number 13? If we add 13 months, we get the date 2-3 in 2023, the date of the Ohio train derailment in East Palestine. Is the explosion and emergency evacuation also a Kamala Harris plane crash sign? 2-3 in 2023 is exactly 3 sets of 7 weeks to the predicted date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on June 30th, 2023. Is there confirmation of Joshua symbolism in the train derailment? Well, arguably, the incident is a symbolic breach of security. Many reports say there were 50 cars. Some say 51, but Wikipedia says this isn't known if this is accurate. 50 equals Pentecost, which equals Jericho walls of collapse. The Jericho security walls collapse. Okay, and that's because the walls of security that collapsed on Jericho would have been on Pentecost. God has proven that through parallels of signs that were, through a trail of signs that were parallel with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, which ended with the climax of the symbolic day the walls of security fell on Jericho on Pentecost in 2018 and 2019 and 2020. All right, so anyway, that's the case. And so that's why 50 symbolizes the walls of security collapsing. And there were 50 cars on the train. The governor of Ohio was the 50th Attorney General of Ohio, as I explained earlier. The governor is the 70th governor of Ohio. Earlier in this email thread, I mentioned that 70 plus 50 equals 120, among other things, and other things. But it seems this 70th governor is part of a 3 sets of 7. Mike DeWine served the 7th Ohio district in the U.S. House of Representatives. The reports say that 70 agencies responded to the disaster. From the following article, quote, first responders from nearly 70 emergency agencies from Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania quickly mobilized, unquote. And so we have a 3 sets of 7 here. We have the 70th governor, 70 emergency agencies, and the 70th governor was what represented the 7th Ohio district in the U.S. House of Representatives. And again, as I explained earlier, Mike DeWine, which hints at divine, is a prophetic sign. And we have a 3 sets of 7 right there. Clearly, Mike DeWine is prophetic in this. He was also the 59th lieutenant governor. 59 is the 17th prime number, and Ohio is the 17th state. 17 equals goat antichrist because the ancient Hebrew Jews would conduct a ritual sacrifice involving a goat on the Day of Atonement on the Temple Mount. And the Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month, for which the number 17 symbolizes. Also, the Antichrist is described in the book of Revelation as having 10 heads and 7 horns, for which the number 17 also symbolizes. And goat symbolizes Antichrist. Therefore, it seems clear that there are 3 sets of 7 here, which confirms the connection to the thunder snow and the Biden Air Force One sign to Harris's crash. Okay, so again, it is exactly 13 months from the date 113, which is an Antichrist, which is Antichrist symbolism, and there was the King of the North sign, which was Antichrist symbolism, as well as the sneak attack storm, also Antichrist symbolism, because it was the sneak attack on Washington, D.C. And the sneak attack storm hints at the surprise return of Obama as president after Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, and that's why Joe Biden was stuck in his plane in the sneak attack on Washington, D.C. that involved thunder, snow, and Obama's name hints at lightning from heaven, as Jesus said, and so that's what thunder, snow hints at. It hints at Obama. Okay? And so from that 1-3 date, which hints at 13, we add exactly 13 months to get the date of the East Palestine train derailment, which is in turn 3 sets of 7 weeks exactly to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. In other words, her plane crash will tie prophetically to Joe Biden's incident in the Air Force plane during the sneak attack storm in Washington, D.C. All right. 1/3/2022 was also 400 days after the actor that played Darth Vader died. In the movie, Darth Vader died from lightning bolts. He died from lightning from the Emperor. It is now believed that Harris's plane will be struck by lightning, and this will symbolize Luke 10:18. So it is believed that her plane will initially be struck by lightning and turbulence, which will bring her plane down as she's crossing the country from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. It'll bring her plane down over St. Louis. They'll try to make an emergency landing in St. Louis, but then her plane will be struck by a bird. and her plane will crash. And there's many reasons for all of that, which I explain in other videos. But the reason for this 400 days connection between the King of the North sign, the Steelers sign, and the Joe Biden and the airplane sneak attack sign, the thunder snow, which is lightning symbolism, and which connects to Darth Vader, who died from lightning. The reason for the 400 days is because the Antichrist king, because Darth Vader is Antichrist king symbolism, and we have the King of the North sign here too, which is Antichrist king symbolism. The Antichrist king, Pharaoh in Egypt, the king of Egypt, is a type for the Antichrist king. And Pharaoh in Egypt persecuted the Hebrews for 400 years. Hence this 400 days connection between these two lightning and Antichrist king signs.